Okay, so the big thing about mid-rise fires, and this one was kind of interesting as I started working on the program for the mid-rise fires, is that you know, I just figured they were basically small high-rises. They didn't seem to be much different than high-rises as far as construction, I thought. But the more I looked into it, the more that I found that they're significantly different and create some huge challenges for us as far as responding to mid-rise fires if we actually respond to an active working fire. Some of the challenges we find, they're just about as complex as some of the high-rise fires, but they don't have the built-in fire protection and safety features that we find in other high-rise buildings. So some of the things we can find that you're going to find with a mid-rise fire: multiple levels, huge void spaces. Lobby entrances aren't like high-rise fires. You don't have a traditional lobby in a lot of these type of structures here. So you've got multiple access points that only lead to certain portions of the building. You've got long, huge hallways, some of them 300 plus feet, huge footprints that may span literally over almost a full city block. Can be made of either type 2, 3, or 5 lightweight construction, or a hybrid of all the above. Parking garages can be mixed into these and are mixed into these under these structures, above the structures, inside the structures in a donut shape type situation. So there's a number of different challenges associated with the parking garages, and we'll talk about that at the end of this program here. And then you add the security measures into the mix, where then you're going to have all kinds of challenges from the standpoint of you got to get in from the outside, then you got to get into the stairwell, and then you got to get into the either the office or the apartment or whatever you're going to here. So there's multiple layers of security that you're going to be coming into play with, and like I say, the variations of these buildings are basically unlimited. Understanding how these buildings are constructed, the avenues of fire spreads and stuff, fire paths, fire flow paths and stuff, will be critical for us in our success as far as being able to manage these type of events. And just a reminder that we always say on these type of events that, or this type of training, that understand that this is the materials put together based upon volume 2 experience, lots of research. But if you have questions about what we're talking about here today, please don't hesitate to either unmute your mic and ask the question, send me an email afterwards, or certainly check with your department's SOPs, guidelines, or East Deputy if you're not sure about something that we're discussing here today. So for the purposes of this program today, the Phoenix Regional Standard Operating Procedure says mid-rise is defined as anything below 75 feet in height and greater than 3 stories. We're basically talking about anything from 4 to 7 stories is what we're talking about when we talk about mid-rise fires. So we have a lot of mid-rise fires. A lot of mid-rise buildings. As I started doing some research and talking to the different agencies, I know that Mesa has at least 45. I didn't get a final count on that, but I know we have at least 45 here in the city of Mesa. Chandler's got 35 plus, Scottsdale 75 plus, Gilbert 25 plus, and Tempe, which shocked me, they have over 270 buildings that are considered mid-rise structures in Tempe. Phoenix has 175 plus, and we're all building these things on a regular basis. If you drive around town, these are popping up all over the place in any of our major corridors. So if you don't have a lot in your first area, you will soon. So let's talk about the basics of mid-rise construction here in mid-rise buildings. So we talked about them being 4 to 7 stories in height. They can be classified as either businesses, hotel, multifamily, residential, or typically the ones you're going to see. Construction is either type 2 non-combustible. Some of the older buildings we have will be type 3 ordinary, and then some of the newer stuff, or most of the newer stuff we have, is going to be type 5 wood frame. Roof constructions can vary anything from lightweight concrete, reinforced concrete, metal deck, or open web parallel cord peak trusses. You may also see, especially in the multifamily residential. Typically, one of the things you're going to find on these is there's no modern smoke removal systems and limited fire suppression capabilities. And this is what sets these apart from a high-rise structure, in that, like I say, we don't have any ability to evacuate the smoke, at least not easily. And in some situations, they may or may not be sprinklered. Most of the new stuff will be sprinklered, but some of the older things, the older conventionally framed and older style type 3 ordinary construction may not have sprinkler systems. They may or may not have standpipe systems, and so this is going to be a real challenge for us. The other thing that comes into play is that we can't necessarily use the 7-unit deployment model because these buildings aren't designed the same. In the 7-unit high-rise deployment model, the first unit goes to the building systems, and we don't have a fire control room in the majority of these mid-rise structures. So that's not going to help you out. So In most situations, the 7-unit high-rise deployment model that we talked about in one of our last high-rise training classes will probably not be effective on these types of structures, but there may be portions of it you may be able to use. So crews should anticipate and be prepared for horizontal and vertical smoke and fire spread throughout these buildings. Because of the design, the void spaces, and a number of the other factors in here, the possibility for horizontal and well, especially smoke spread, but horizontal smoke and fire spread in these buildings is very typical and won't be unusual. Ventilation will be a priority just because of these structures, and especially residential versus commercial. Commercial structures, obviously, if we have a commercial fire in a commercial structure, a good percentage of the people that are there, or at least people that arrive probably mobile, will leave once if the fire alarms are activated. They will exit the building on their own. Residential structures, maybe not so much because the people may be asleep and maybe in different situations as far as alcohol or drug use or limited mobility. So they may be a little more of a challenge for us. So ventilation is going to be a challenge. It's going to be a big problem. We don't have the ability, we don't have built-in systems that allow us to remove smoke in the majority of these buildings. So being able to ventilate these structures to provide egress and access for our civilians as they exit the structure is going to be a priority for us. Truck access and placement is a big important concept on the mid-rise structures, because in most of our situations with mid-rise structures, if we can get near the building, we have the ability to actually cover the majority of the structure with our aerial apparatus. So if we have people hanging out the balconies, or if we have a situation where we need to utilize an aerial standpipe or do some type of transitional attack, mid-rise structures can be very accessible with our aerial apparatus as long as we have reasonable access to the structure itself. And so you can see here, this is a complex that I just drove by the other day in Tempe that covers literally almost a full whole block, city block here. It's what do we got? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stories, and probably has 400 plus units, 300-foot hallways. And so this is one you're going to see popping up around your cities here if they're not already there, and can be a real challenge for us. And we'll talk about some of the problems associated with mid-rise structures here. So we're going to talk about the differences between commercial mid-rise buildings and residential mid-rise structures, and there's quite a few differences. Just as far as identify them to start off with, typically commercial mid-rise structures won't have balconies associated with them. Occasionally you'll see 1 or 2 for a employee break area maybe, but they don't traditionally have balconies in our commercial mid-rise structures. You'll usually see some signage on the building which will help us determine, that as far as the name of the company that either rents a portion of the building or manages the building itself. Open floor plans also are not unusual. You have the cubicle farms in some of these structures, and some of our mid-rises, I know as in talking to our fire prevention folks, that some of our mid-rises can have open floor plans up to 10,000 square feet. So that's a massive open floor plan, and then you mix in cubicles and okay, let's hang on for a minute. Okay, I heard we weren't able to see the PowerPoint. Can you see the PowerPoint now? Anybody unmute their?
No, all we can see is the audience, Pat.
Okay, hang on. Interesting. Okay. Share.
Perfecto. Thank you very much, Pat.
Well, I apologize here. We got things are a little bit different here with the new setup here, so I apologize for that not being available to you here. So, okay, so unfortunately, we probably won't go back, but this will be available. I'll give you the link to get this if you want to see the first few slides that we missed here. I apologize for that. So talking about the differences between commercial and residential mid-rises here. Once again, usually no balconies. You have typically will have signage on the buildings, floor plans up to 10,000 square feet. Most of the commercial stuff you're going to find is probably going to be type 2 construction, non-combustible. You will occasionally find something that's lightweight, but most of the stuff that I've seen in my research and just from personal experience has been mostly type 2 construction. But we do have heavy fire loads in these structures. It's just like any other commercial structure, and especially like your high rises. You may have a tremendous fire load because of the office furniture and supplies and equipment and other things that may be on the different floors here. So We need to consider that just like we do when we utilize for commercial, high-rise commercial fires, we deploy our 2.5-inch hand lines, and we ought to consider doing the same here. So that can be a huge part of our fire attack as far as just some of the considerations here versus 1 3/4 inch, which may be appropriate on some of our residential structures that have a more compartmentalized layout. We talk about some of the non-combustible, like I say, typically you're going to see either steel framed or concrete. This is some examples of some steel frame structures. They may have either a brick, block, metal, or glass exterior sheeting, but you'll see a lot of the stuff, and you'll see these going up. But this is primarily what I see right now in the majority of the valley that's building mid-rise construction as far as commercial is going to be the steel frame buildings. I see these all over the place here. So this is some of the stuff that I've seen here just in the last week or so as we drive around here, but mostly it's going to be a lot of your steel framed construction. There is some concrete, and I'm not sure whether that's based upon cost or the type of building or whatever else, but we do have some concrete structures that are still going up, just not as many. And these structures you'll see, as you can see here, interior walls are typically 2x4 metal studs with drywall. Floors are typically poured in place lightweight concrete, and roof can be anything from flat insulated roof with or metal decking, could be a number of types of roof lines or roof types. Here's another one that's going up in Tempe, Friendship Village, one of the additions that they're constructing as we speak. This is one, let's see, I'm trying to remember, I think this is, I don't remember where this is. I think this is in Chandler here, but I'm not sure here. But anyway, so there are some construction or concrete constructed mid-rise structures that are going up right now, but just not as many here. One of the things to think about, especially on your commercial mid-rise structures, is going to be your large hidden spaces. And this is no different than high-rise buildings. When we talk about plenum space, as we get the drop ceilings, and you can see in the top right picture here, the amount of space and the volume of space that's above the ceiling, drop ceiling, can be tremendous. And we can talk about, it says here almost as much as 25% of the void space on a floor can be above the ceiling. So we need to keep that in mind when we start talking about identifying fire spread, hidden fire, void spaces, and some of the challenges associated with that we need to check and immediately determine as quickly as possible whether we have fire in the overhead, and that might allow extension throughout the floor, or maybe to a potentially even another floor. Residential structures are a little bit different. Typically, you're going to see balconies are going to be common, and you can see like on the picture down below there. Stairs are typically located at the end of the hallways. Hallways maybe as much as 300 feet. This is a picture of one of the hallways that I was building the other day, just taking some pictures. You can see here, this is, I'm guessing, at least 200 plus feet here. So obviously it's going to be important when we make access to that floor that we come in through the right stairwell, depending on whether we're coming off the truck from the ground, whether we're coming off standpipes or whatever else we may be accessing the fire floor with, that we come in from the right location here. Otherwise, we're going to run out of hose before we get to the fire itself. Some of these structures may have center courtyards with or without access. This can create a problem for us. Obviously, if we don't have a center courtyard, for example, in some of our smaller 5 or 6 story hotels that are out there, the standalone hotels without a center courtyard, we have pretty good access to all sides of the building if we should have a fire and somebody's hanging out the window. But a lot of these structures are U-shaped, or some of them are donut-shaped here, where they have a center courtyard, and you may have people hanging out on the balconies on the center courtyard, and you're trying to figure out how I'm going to get a 35-foot ladder into that center courtyard to make access to the people that are on the second floor or third floor on some of these balconies. Could be a big challenge for us, and a lot of that's going to come through, and we're going to talk a whole lot more about this in a few minutes here, about the importance of pre-planning these structures. They're going to be as much or more important than just about any other building in your first due area. You may have multiple points of entrance, and this is kind of one of those where you think to yourself, well, with commercial mid-rise structure, if you go in the front door, you're probably going to find access to most of the building here going in the front door. Residential structures are completely different. You're going to find that if you go in some doors, it gives you access to certain portions of the building. Sometimes it's certain floors of the buildings. Sometimes it goes to access to a stairwell. Sometimes it doesn't. So if you're not familiar with the structure, you may find yourself going into multiple doors trying to find access, try to gain access to a stairwell that gets you to the 3rd or 4th floor if you're not familiar with it. So I know as I was doing some research and looking, and not only reading articles, but looking through some of these buildings, very complicated to try to figure out how I'm going to get to that 3rd or 4th floor on the west side of the building, from this side of the building. So it's one of those that the more we know about the structure, the better off we're certainly going to be. And you can see an example of kind of a floor plan that's just of some of a simple mid-rise down there below here, where you can kind of see just the layout of it, and the stairwell is kind of on either end here. Also, you're going to look at have to consider you got multiple layers of security into these buildings. Once again, what may seem simple for a standard apartment complex with exterior entrances, exterior stairwells, which is pretty easy for us to get in and out of, these structures most of the time will not have exterior stairwells, will have interior stairwells. So you're gonna have to figure out, first of all, which door gets you there. Then you got to figure out how to get through that door, whether it be glass or metal. And then once you get into the stairwell, you have to use, a lot of times we'll have to use another key or key fob to get out of the stairwell onto the floor. And then obviously when you get to the apartment or office, or in this situation for residential, once you get to the apartment, you have once again either a wooden or metal door typically in those situations where you're gonna have to gain access to as well. So multiple layers of security will probably slow our access into these type of structures if we have a working event. So here's what I'm talking about. This is an example of a building in Tempe here. You got multiple doors on that front. You'd think one of those doors, is, even though it's a leasing office, would get you to one of the upper floors, and it doesn't. Neither one of those doors gets you into anything other than just one's a small office and one is the leasing office, and that doesn't have access to any other portions of the building. So in this structure here, they've got a residential access door on either side, which you can't see here, and then most of the other doors are going to be on the parking garage, which is underneath, which gives you access into the structure itself. So we pull up on this thinking that I'm just going to go in one of these doors and have access like we do on most apartment complexes or certainly a high-rise structure. It's not going to be the case for a lot of your residential mid-rise constructions. Here's another example of your center hallways and some of the layouts of some of the mid-rise that I got a copy of the other day. And these can be any shape. We talk about everything from U-shape to L-shape to just straight line buildings to complete donut shape. I mean, these and if you start looking around here and you start thinking about, if you come up the center stairwell there, the stairwell on the left portion of your screen there, and you have to deploy a line from there all the way over to the far right side here. I mean, that's a pretty significant distance. And then you start talking about, how am I going to search all these apartments if we have a working fire and limited visibility in the hallway? So these are some challenges, some big challenges that we're going to get to later in this program here. But you can see that these type of buildings can create some huge problems for us, especially because we don't have this built-in smoke removal systems. A lot of times we don't have windows that will open. We have stairwells, once again, that may or may not have roof access and roof hatches. So these can be some real challenges for us if we try to address not only the search and rescue operations associated with this, but also ventilation operations. There's a U-shaped example of a mid-rise structure here. Lightweight wood frame construction is what we typically will see with our residential mid-rise construction. Type 3 was ordinary construction we saw in the 1980s, but we have just a limited number of those. You see a lot of that, especially in some of the older areas. ASU's got a lot of Type 3 ordinary construction in some of their mid-rises that were built in the 60s, 70s. And that area, you see some of that stuff. But most of the stuff we have now that you're going to see, especially the stuff going up now, will be Type 3 ordinary construction for residential. Exterior walls are typically going to be OSB or plywood, covered with some kind of insulation material, and then covered with either stucco, vinyl, masonry, or who knows what. OSB insulation found under the siding may contribute to the rapid fire spread on the exterior of these structures, which allows fire to travel from one floor to the next. And we talk about that, some of the challenges we have with not only void space fires, but exterior fires as well. A lot of these structures are covered with these polystyrene facades, covered with stucco, which unfortunately, once it starts burning, it can burn underneath the stucco and travel between floors for you and create some challenges for us as far as trying to find access and find limited or hidden fires in some of our mid-rise structures. Floor assemblies, this is once again another challenge that we have, and it's not any different necessarily than a 2-story or 3-story apartment fire that we have, but it's not something we normally think of when we start talking about mid-rises or certainly high-rise structures. We don't typically think that we need to sound the floor when we go above the fire floor in a typical high-rise fire. But so you may be on the 5th floor of a mid-rise structure that you're thinking is pretty stable, but this is what you have basically underneath you. You may have some lightweight parallel cord trusses or the plywood I-beams or ply-eyes, as they're called. And obviously with the poke throughs and other things, these things can deteriorate very rapidly when exposed to fire. Also give us options or areas for that fire to extend. But it can give us some real challenges as we operate above that. And you can see the pictures down below, the deterioration of the which would be the ceiling of one floor and the floor of the floor above here, that if we're not sounding, we may find ourselves falling through the floor or into the involved apartment below if we're not careful. Void spaces, we've been talking about this, and this is a real challenge for us, especially on the lightweight construction, type 5 construction. You see, not unusual for us to have numerous, they build these buildings obviously from a standpoint of cost savings. So typically you'll see the kitchens will line up on 1st through 5th floors, well, either the 2nd through 5th at least, or 2nd through 6th, whatever floors we have, many floors you have. Bathrooms will line up above each other, so you have a lot of void spaces and a lot of pipes and ventilation pipes and water lines and electrical lines and other things going up in certain channels. But it also gives us certainly a potential vertical void space to allow that fire to extend up into either the attic or certainly floors above the initial involved floor. We talked about the combustible exterior siding, which is another challenge for us as far as vertical fire spread. Vertical fire extension can occur by several methods on our mid-rise fires. Fire lapping out the windows obviously can extend to the floor above. Extending to unprotected or compromised void spaces, which we've been talking a lot about this morning already. Fires extending up through the holes created by the fire itself, which once again it can burn through the floor, which we don't typically see in our type 2 non-combustible construction or high-rise construction. You actually can have floors obviously burning through the floor and into the next apartment above. And then you also have the exterior fires originating from the patio or balcony or vehicle parked outside. You get what's called a patio stack fire, where you can see it just travels from one balcony to the next until it either makes its way into the attic, which is not unusual in these type of fires. You can see there's an example of a vertical fire spread here from an incident that occurred. I think this was back east somewhere here that occurred a little while back. Building floor plan comparison, residential versus commercial. So you can see here just some examples of residentials are typically more compartmentalized versus the open floor plan you see on commercial structures. So you can see down below there on the left side, you got a residential, hotel building there that you have, and you have the layouts. It's very simple. And then you have your commercial structure on the right here with open floor plans and cubicle farm, where you have, once again, heavy fuel loads, large open spaces where we talked about before, utilizing a 2.5-inch hand line may be appropriate for the reach, volume, and penetration that we get through a 2.5-inch hand line versus 1 3/4 inch that may be appropriate for a residential mid-rise construction fire. Here's another example just of the layout, and you start talking about the complexity of the layout of some of these types of structures. So you can imagine coming up the stairwell up here in the top corner of this picture here. If you come out on this floor here, you can imagine trying to conduct a search or trying to reach different portions of this structure here with a single crew, or even with a 2.5 may be difficult until you can get into certain portions of this building to be able to reach over the long spaces and the heavy fire loads that may be encountered on some of these type of events. Mixed use, this is one of the things you're going to see a whole lot of, especially on your major corridors. You see a lot of the mixed use stuff, and I know just about everything that you see on Apache, everything you're seeing down on Main Street that's coming up in Mesa. A lot of your areas, especially anything that's anywhere near a major corridor, you see structures. I know they've got a huge one down at Higley and Ray, I think it is. Anyway, they've got a number of these throughout the valley that you see here. And basically what you have is you have commercial occupancies on the first floor and then residential occupancies above that. So you may have a single commercial occupancy level, which is typically going to be a non-combustible construction, and then either 4 or 5 floors of residential construction above that. So that creates some challenges for us as far as once again, we talk about access, whether or not we can get through, how do we get through that first floor commercial structure to get into the apartments or the residential portion of the building above? Where's going to be our access there? Can we, or is that another access point for us? And then the challenges we have just with any commercial fire that we would have with any other commercial occupancy that may be a challenge for us, maybe associated with these type of buildings as well. So if we look at this here and we start thinking about which one do we have, so just as a guess here, what do we have, commercial or residential on the left? What are you guys thinking? What do you think? Commercial on the left, about on the right? Commercial, residential? Residential, right? I mean, this is Captain Obvious stuff here, but we've got we've got balconies, the one on the right, no balconies, least obvious, the one on the left. Some are not quite as simple though. There's other buildings you'll see, you kind of go, I'm not real sure about that because it's got a label on the front of it, but I mean, it's got some signage on the front of it, but it also has balconies. So some are a little more complex and a little more confusing. How about this one? Commercial or residential? Commercial, right? But look at this one. Is this going to be a challenge for us? Got retail, a couple floors of parking garage, and then office space above that. So we get dispatched to this incident, and we've got 3 cars burning on the parking garage, and we've got people above that. We've got heavy smoke rolling out every inch of this parking garage if you were to have multiple cars burning here. And then you got people calling above that say they've got smoke in their offices, and they can't get down because somebody propped open the door because everybody keeps forgetting their key fob. So the door from the garage into the office space now is contaminated with smoke, and so we have people complaining about that. So could this be a challenge for us as we start trying to conduct fire operations in a building like this? It could be a huge challenge for us. But this is not unusual. You see a lot of creativity with the mid-rise structures, which are just can really create some problems for us as we encounter a fire or something in this type of building. Commercial, residential. It's kind of a little bit both. We got commercial obviously on the bottom, but this one's got 2 floors of commercial. I haven't seen this one before. This is one downtown Main Street here. And then we got 1, 2, 3, 4 stories of residential above. Looks like 2 floors of commercial. At least I'm not sure what it's going to look like when it's done here, but at least that's what it appears to be right now. Either commercial or office space or some type of commercial retail space here on the bottom 2 floors. So I haven't seen that one before, but not unusual to see all kinds of different things that are out there right now coming up in our different cities. Please. Oop. Can I get you to throw a microphone on here? Please, no.
I was just pointing out to Pat, everybody, this one going in downtown Mesa here is actually a manufactured mid-rise. So all the residential units, 1 unit at a time, were built in a warehouse, air conditioned on jigs. So very, very well built occupancy.
Okay, were you guys able to hear that by any chance? Everybody able to hear that Captain Barnhart's comments? Can somebody unmute for just a second? Let me know if were you guys able to hear Captain Barnhart?
Yeah, yes, we heard.
Perfect, thank you. Yeah, but that's you will see that there's all kinds of different construction that's out there. So I was not aware of that, but I know that they've done that in other types of buildings, and they're actually better built than on-site structures, just because they typically have, with the jigs and stuff, you have a nail pattern and other things that they build as far as the construction that makes it even typically better built than it is on-site built. Some of the things that with the quality control issues that sometimes have challenges on site. So we talk about fire alarm panels. In a high-rise building, we have a fire control room. So we typically will have a significant size room, or at least an area of the building, that allows us to get inside and be able to determine what type of incident we're responding to and what may be going on above us. With mid-rise structures, not so much. So these are some of the fire control panels off of some of the mid-rise structures that I found here recently. So if you look at this, you kind of go, well, this is not much different probably than the one you have in your house. So you think to yourself, and you're going to come in here and get a lot of information like you might off a high-rise fire, where you either have a printout or have the ability to scroll back and forth between different pages to try to figure out what may be going on. Probably not so much here. You might, if you have the ability to pass the annunciator panel as you make entry into the building and can get information off it, that's great. I would just tell you that most of my experience in these, and as far as my research and looking at these, is that you're not going to receive the same types of information that you might from a high-rise fire control panel or fire control room. So anyway, they may be beneficial, but just understand that they may have limited information. And the other problem you have is they may or may not be near the entrance you're gaining access into the structure. These will typically be located in remote entrance points at various exterior locations of the building. So first of all, you got to figure out where it is, then you got to find it, then you got to be able to read it. So this may be a little more of a challenge for us than we have otherwise. It may be something that if we're trying to identify or locate a hidden fire somewhere, it may be beneficial for us. But as far as coming in and getting the information you need as you make access to the building, you're probably not going to get what you're looking for from a lot of our fire control panels, at least initially. Here's another example of a fire control panel that I saw just the other day. Very limited. Another challenge we have, another difference between what we typically see with our high-rise structures is going to be the lack of an RP, security, or a building engineer. When we respond to high-rise fires, one of the benefits we have, especially if it's during the day, 8 to 5, is you have a somewhat decent chance of having a building engineer on site if it's a significant size high-rise, or some type of RP that may have information about the building itself and some of the construction or some of the fire features that it has. Most of your mid-rise fires will probably not have something like that. You're probably not going to be able to pull up and just say, hey, is your building engineer here, or even a security officer. You may see a security officer or somebody sitting at the front desk of a commercial mid-rise, because they typically will have a lobby on most of your commercial mid-rises, so there may be somebody there that might have knowledge, or it may just be a receptionist that may or may not have any information on the building at all. The RP on site, especially for your residential RP, maybe during business hours, you might have somebody in the leasing. My experience with even going in to talk to people is that half the time they're not occupied, and the other half the time they're brand new. So it's probably not going to be something that's going to give you a tremendous amount of information if you go inside and talk to the RP, if they're even on site for your a mid-rise incident. And then once again, your security. I know my daughter was living in a mid-rise structure over in Tempe, and they had security for the first couple of years when they opened the building. After that, it went to part-time security, and after that, it went to a security guard that was over like 3 different facilities in 3 different cities that would come by every so often. So being able to get there, get information from an RP, building security, or building engineer is probably going to be limited on mid-rise structures, unlike high-rise buildings. So it's going to be a little more of a challenge for us, once again, as far as trying to determine where to gain access, what may be involved, and some of the other challenges associated with that building. Fire features. This is another difference that you're going to find for mid-rise structures versus high-rise structures, or some of the other type of structures we have. The buildings may be sprinklered or not sprinklered at all, and that's not unusual. Typically, anything probably built since about 2000 is probably going to be sprinklered, but as far as standpipes go, that may or may not be the case. Understand that, that these systems also, if they are sprinklered, will typically not have a fire pump, and with the exception of very few types of mid-rises, and those are typically going to be one where you have either a compromised water system in that area of the city, where they need a booster pump of some type that will just to get it up to just normal pressures. But having a fire pump like we do in high-rise structures is not buildings, which means they're running off of street pressure, which means we need to pump, and we have to pump the standpipe and sprinkler systems on these structures, because once again, they're not designed to take care of themselves like a high-rise structure may. Standpipes we talked about may or may not be present. As I putting this program together a few months ago, several standpipes, or they'd have them in just one stairwell, versus high-rise, which typically has a standpipe in every stairwell. You're once again, through pre-planning and familiarization, or your pre-plan itself, is maybe one of the challenges you have is even finding a standpipe, a stairwell that has a standpipe. And then once again, there are some of our mid-rise structures that don't have a standpipe at all. As these were built, a lot of times, it's just like in any city, there are trade-offs that are made with the builders that allow them, if they put sprinklers in the building, they're not required to have a standpipe every so often, or only one standpipe in one stairwell, or whatever. They do trade-off a lot of times for these contractors and building construction here. So being familiar with this is going to pay off for us if we get dispatched to one of these type of structures, knowing either if they do or don't have standpipes, we have to come off the truck, or that we have other options for us. And if we do have a standpipe in some of our, we talk about some of these long hallways, not for us to have a standpipe in midway down the hallway, because the hallways are over 300 plus feet. So what would be the challenge, if we can think about it, some of the challenges why we would want to connect to standpipes in the stairwell versus in a hallway? Any thoughts? What? Yeah, safe area primarily. That's one of the number one things, but there's one of the other factors that come into play, and we'll talk about it in just a second here. I'll go to, I think it's our next slide after this one, but one of the things we need to consider, we talked about this, supporting the fire protection features with these early on in these types of incidents is going to be very important to us. Whereas in some types of events, we might be able to get away with, because of the fire pump, might be able to get away with not pumping that a standpipe or sprinkler system early on. It's not going to be the case here. A lot of these standpipes are dry standpipes. So if we think we're going to be able to hook into a standpipe and operate on a fire floor, if it's not being pumped, there's no water. So that's one of the things that's different about mid-rises versus high-rises once again. So knowing that whether or not we have standpipes with that are wet or dry standpipes, and if we have them at all, are going to be a huge factor as far as our success in the operation. Another challenge you have in some of these huge buildings is they have multiple standpipe connections, and some standpipe connections only serve a particular stairwell. So whereas in a lot of high-rise buildings, you pump one standpipe connection, it pumps all standpipe connections, or the That's not the case in a lot of the mid-rises. And I know in Tempe, there's several of them where every standpipe's got it. They're dry standpipes, and they've got a connection to every one of them. So if you're going to go up that standpipe, use that standpipe, you got to make sure somebody's pumping it. So we need to address those standpipes early on. And then we talk about here, commandees obviously support each one of the areas involved and needing to pump, maybe to pump all of them in that building. Another challenge we have is where that sprinkler system divides. Sometimes they have multiple sprinkler connections as well. And unless you know that this feeds the east and west wing of the building, which sometimes are labeled and not, you may or may not be pumping the right sprinkler connection, which once again is unusual or different than a high-rise building. So you can see obviously different type of connections. We need to pump all of the connections we can as early as possible in the fire. This is what I was talking about before. We have, there's a lot of these buildings because of the length of a connection down the hallway itself. The problem we have with that, as you can imagine, is Captain Barnhart talked about, not only the safety we have from connecting into a stairwell if things go wrong and a flow path changes in a building, you can get back into that area of safe refuge in the hallway, but also it gives us that protection from, like say, from heat and smoke as we make entry. Whereas if we connect to a standpipe in the middle of the hallway, things go wrong, we follow the line back to the standpipe. Where are we? In the worst possible situation, we're actually 150 feet probably from the nearest stairwell. So that's going to be one of those situations we talk about the importance of. Now that may be something we use as a second line after we get the initial line deployed, where we can have a line that gets us back to the safety of the stairwell. But I don't know that I would use this as my primary line, just from the standpoint of if things go wrong, once again, it brings you back to the middle of the hallway versus a stairwell for exit. A lot of these structures have self-closing fire doors due to the hallways here. They'll have self-closing doors. Some do, some don't. Some of the older mid-rise buildings won't have the doors at all. Some do. A lot of the newer stuff does. Utilities, you can see here, a lot of the utilities are serviced by just standard utilities, maybe gas or electric. And then the shutoffs are typically either located on the exterior of the structures you can see here, or sometimes they're located in the garage. And once again, you know, are we going to shut off the power to the whole building, or are we just going to try to isolate it certainly to individual apartments or individual floors if we can, is more appropriate when indicated. Here's some of the differences, and we're actually going to go through this because it's pretty important that we point this out. This is the differences between and similarities between mid-rise and high-rise fires. Fire control room on a mid-rise fire, probably not. A high-rise fire, you're probably going to see some type of fire control room. A fire alarm panel, we talked about the differences there. Once again, in a mid-rise, you're going to see some type of annunciator panel, maybe limited. High-rise fires, you may see a panel, you may see a printout, a printer, and a number of other things that you may see as far as a fire alarm panel in a high-rise structure. Smoke control and ventilation systems, you're not going to see these typically in our mid-rise fires. You will see them typically in a high-rise fire. So the ability to evacuate smoke from a hallway or multiple hallways or a stairwell in a high-rise building can be accomplished, I would say, relatively easily, especially if you have a building engineer on site. A mid-rise fire, not so much. It's going to be a huge challenge for us, and we're going to talk more about ventilation in a minute. Floor stairwell pressurization systems, once again, no in mid-rises, yes in high-rises typically. Standpipes, maybe, not all stairways, maybe dry on mid-rises. They will be present on high-rise fires. Sprinkler systems, typically after 2002, you'll see sprinklers in all our mid-rises will be sprinklered after 2002. High-rise I know these, most of the ones, I think everyone that I'm aware of in the East Valley is sprinklered that I'm aware of here anyway, unless somebody else knows the one that isn't. Fire pumps, typically no fire pump on a mid-rise fire. High-rise fires, there typically are. And we talk about the importance of this because with high-rise fires, even though we hook up into the FDCs on high-rise fires, we typically do not pump them because they are designed to operate by themselves with the fire pump. So we typically don't try to overtake the fire pump on a high-rise fire. Mid-rise fire is completely different. They will not have a fire pump for the most part, and it's going to be incumbent upon us to pump the FDCs and standpipe connections on these type of structures. Stack effect is possible in mid-rise fires. It's probable on high-rise fires. Lobby or centralized entrance, you'll typically have a lobby in your commercial mid-rise, but not unusual to have. If you do have a lobby or leasing office in our residential structures, it typically will not have access to the remainder of the building. So it may or may not have access to the remainder of the building. High-rise fires typically will have a lobby and will have a centralized entrance that we can gain access to. Collapse potential, it is possible with mid-rise, especially the lightweight wood frame construction. Is it possible to have a collapse of the structure, or portions of the structure itself? Obviously, for high-rise structure, very unusual. Certainly, we know it's possible, but not certainly would be predictable. Floor compromise due to the fire, certainly possible with mid-rise, not very likely with high-rise. Combustible structural members, certainly with our ordinary construction, you may see some of it, and certainly with our lightweight construction, it is combustible structural members, and high-rise is a no. FDC, we talked about that. Yes, if sprinklers are present for both. Standpipe connections, once again, may be decentralized. You may have either a standpipe connection for a wing, a certain hallway, a certain stairwell, but may not be centralized versus what you have centralized for most of your high-rise structures. Keys or key fobs. This is another big difference, and it seems simple, but it's going to be a huge challenge for us if we get a working incident in one of these types of structures. When we go to a high-rise, we go to the fire control room, we open up the key box, and a lot of times, if we're lucky, there's 5 or 6 or 7 sets of keys in there. For the most part, because there isn't a fire control room on mid-rise structures, you're probably going to have a Knox box somewhere that may have one key fob, and it may be located at not one of the entrances that you're trying to make entry in. So once again, a huge challenge for us, not only to find the key fob, hopefully the key fob works, that gets you in not only the exterior door, but the interior door getting into the stairwell, and then it probably won't get you into the room itself. So key fobs are going to be a challenge for us. So the importance of us blocking doors open, certainly not on the fire floor itself, allowing smoke to spread, but at least some of the exit doors or exterior doors for other crews to make entry may be important for us. Fire phones, not going to be fire phones available. Typically no communication systems on mid-rise fires. Knox locking standpipe kits, standpipe caps. You typically don't see those on high-rise fire, but you may see more of them on mid-rise, especially residential, as people put junk in those our standpipes on the different floors here. So you may see Knox locking standpipe caps. So be prepared to bring your dog bone or whatever they call it, the key that you have for that. Elevators may or may not automatically recall. Once again, the elevators may only serve different portions of the building and probably require a key fob to get in and out. We can override them obviously with the fireman feature, but most of the recommendations I've seen, including volume 2, says we don't typically use elevators for mid-rise fires. Maybe toward the end when we're using them just to shuttle equipment and people, but not initially, just because it's less than 10 floors, so we don't typically use elevators on mid-rise fires. Large attic spaces, very typical and very and often will be present on our residential mid-rise fires. Not typical for our commercial mid-rise, and certainly not typical for high-rise incidents. Different types of construction, we talked about that. Obviously, wood frame construction, non-combustible, are typical for mid-rise, and typically you have type 1 or type 2 for high-rise incidents. And then centralized HVAC systems. You will have something probably similar to that you might find in a high-rise for a mid-rise, just smaller. But typically, most of your residential apartments will have their own individual units and air handlers for those, as compared to a high-rise incident. So let's talk about response considerations for a few minutes here. Just remember that if we respond to a fire and you got any signs of a working fire, we need to consider balancing it to a first alarm as soon as consider going to a second. The amount of fire or to address a working fire in a structure that's between 4 and 7 stories is going to be significant. If you have a working fire, my guess is you'll eventually get to a third, but I would at least start off with a first. And if you arrive on the scene and you've got smoke showing or people hanging out windows, go to a second. You're going to need every one of those resources. Also, if you have multiple callers reporting the fire, large visible column of smoke, reports of people trapped, those kind of things are certainly should spur you to go to at least out and then get on the scene and consider a second. So if we're seeing this kind of stuff as we leave the station, it should make you pretty nervous and should help us to understand we need a number of resources started early on to these operations. Review pre-plans while en route for company, because our stations that most of our response times for our first 2 units probably going to be less. So having the ability to direct your engineer and get out a pre-plan and structure may be difficult to do. So we talk about knowing these. where the entrances are, where the stairwells are, is going to be very important for us. But if you have the company coming in on these, having the ability to look at the building layout, some of the entrances and exits, the building construction type, whether they have sprinklers and standpipe connections and shutoffs and where those are located, apparatus access to the building, roof access, firewalls, unusual hazards, whether or not we have a basement or parking structures below, and utility shutoffs are some of the things that hopefully we might see during in a pre-plan prior to arrival. On-scene activities, tactics and strategies. We're going to talk about this for a few minutes here. Tactical objectives, conservation on any incident, fireground factors that we're going to be dealing with on mid-rise incidents are obviously structures have the potential for a huge life challenge for us, especially residential, commercial as well. But once again, we talked about unless you explosion or something of that nature, we don't typically see the life safety hazards for mid-rise structure, but it is possible, and we'll show you an event that lost multiple lives in Texas a few years ago here. The fire itself can be a challenge for us depending on where it is. We talk about large fire loads. We talk about void spaces in type 5 structures where we got void spaces where fire up into the attic very easily and very quickly. The building itself, the arrangement, the resources that are going to be needed in the here. We talk about challenges we have floor and actually getting water on the fire as being a challenge. Well, I think you're going to find a similar challenge here because once again you have we just finding access doors to the building into the right portion of the building, and then determining whether we're going to use our attack packs to come off the standpipe or whether we use come off the trucks off the street, which we'll talk about here momentarily, which is going to be more beneficial and give us and get water on the fire as quick as possible. Fireground factors, there's a bunch of them, and obviously we're not going to go through all these. Know that just like any other structure, if you go through there, you see the different challenges associated with the building, the fire, occupancy, life hazard, all the stuff that goes in there on every incident that we go to. Risk management plan at the forefront of your mind, and just to understand that we may operate in the green a little bit longer on a mid-rise residential structure only because the number of people that may be involved in the event itself versus a residential structure where we may have 3 or 4 people and we've got a resident reported all clear. We're not going to get a resident reported all clear on a mid-rise residential structure. So now we have to try to gain access into the different floors, the different apartments or the different portions of the building, and to complete that primary search, which is going to be very difficult, very time consuming, and very resource dependent. So we may operate a little longer in the green than we would in the other areas, so it may be more important for us to attack the fire versus, we'll do it in conjunction with the search and rescue to take the fire away from the victims versus the victims away from the fire. Tactical objectives we talked about don't change in mid-rise fires, but the order they are achieved may. Understanding that if we can achieve fire control, stopping the forward progress or extension of the fire will solve most of our dangers and problems. If we eliminate the fire, we eliminate the smoke, we eliminate some of the challenges that we have associated with that. As we try to determine is it going to be in our best interest to shelter in place, or are we going to try to evacuate everybody from the structure? Property conservation, salvage, and overhaul is going to be a huge problem for us on mid-rise fires, just because of the ability of that water certainly to travel from floor to floor, as well as that smoke to floors and all the floors above on these type of incidents. Having multiple critical fireground factors on the front end of this should be a major red flag for us, and we should understand the challenges and stuff that we're going to have associated with mid-rise fires. Pre-plan, we talked about that. I can't talk about it enough. If you have a mid-rise in your first 2 area, get out and look through it. Look and see where the stairwells are, where the entrance points are to the structure, whether they have FTCs, whether they have standpipes, whether they entire building or portions of the building. Going to be very important for us. Command presence is going to be important until we make that transfer of command into the battalions, once they get there. But it's going to be important for us as an initial incident commander, IC number 1, the company officer, to make sure they come in and that they deploy units appropriately as we start setting up the event for success. And then understanding certainly the differences, operational differences between a apartment fire, high-rise fire, and a mid-rise fire. Be completely different for the most part. Paying attention to that, we can get ourselves way behind as far as managing these types of events. Some of the challenges you can see here, some of the differences between apartment fires versus high-rise fires. You know, when we got limited access or no exterior stairwells, fires where we typically will have exterior stairwells where it's easy for us into the multiple floors and multiple apartments. No elevator use will typically not be an option for us. No lobby will be established typically. No on-deck floor. Hose line hookup to the floor below will be probably more challenging because they're maybe on the first or the second floor. Large life safety considerations. The tack lines will be deployed differently. We'll talk about that more in just a second. Parking structure challenges and no mechanical ventilation systems. Understand that these are going to be manpower intensive events. We need to talk about going to a second alarm on these type of events, making a tactical reserve, and utilizing application level 1 and 2 staging. Establishing forward sectors with officers, and this is one that will be one of the priorities for the incident commander, getting people up on the floors to be able to manage these type of events, because there's a tremendous challenge associated with the count these type of events. And then understanding the flow path of events that have occurred nationally that have resulted in firefighter fatalities here as a result of flow, especially when you have wind-driven conditions. And it's not unusual fires in their apartments to door open, and they're going to come back and put the fire out or whatever they may do. So we have that ability for that fire and smoke and fire to get into the stairwell. And then if wind conditions fails or a sliding glass door fails, and we have firefighters in the hallway and they create the exhaust port, that you may have that flow path change and all the way down the halls in a very rapid manner. This is, I know one of the incidents that occurred in FDNY, they said between the time that a window failed and the 3 firefighters in the hallway were trapped and went to a mayday was less. Understand we have long hallways, difficulty in managing smoke. We have extension that we have to worry about the floor above with possible extension. Also, floors may be compromised. The floor below, we need to worry about certainly salvage operations associated with that. We've already talked about pumping the FTC, and then having a roof may be indicated if necessarily for ventilation, a roof report, and some of the other not vertical ventilation necessarily for cutting holes, but maybe access the different exterior points for us to ventilate smoke if necessary from some of the stairwells when they're there. On the fire floor, we need to access the fire floor, size up the fire floor. Do we have clean or dirty hallways? That's going to be a huge challenge for us. We know if we get there, it's going to be a much easier operation for us as we deploy the hand line down toward the involved apartment versus opening up this stairwell and finding we have zero visibility in a hallway. Going to challenge us as far as being able to deploy our hand lines and where we're going to deploy them from. Are we going to do a hall or stairwell deployment, 1 3/4 or 2.5? Once again, comes into play whether we're residential or commercial. A little bit of creativity may need to be applied in some of these incidents, and we're going to talk about that in a second. The other thing they talk about from volume 2, they talk about creating areas of safe. And this is something we don't do very often, but it may be something, especially in these hallways, as we may force doors into apartments near the involved apartment. So if something goes wrong, we have the ability to dip inside there, close the door, and be in a situation where we can be in a survivable situation. And as we try to determine whether or not we can exit either back through that hallway eventually, or whether we need to come down from an exterior point. But just something to consider. We don't do that very often, but also considering trying to work our way down a 150-foot hallway that's in a flow path situation, probably not practical and probably not survivable if things go wrong. Fobs, metal doors, door stops are going to be something that's going to need to not only evaluate but to probably deploy. Management of the smoke itself, we typically will not use gas fans on these types of structures because we don't want to add the CO. Most of our agencies in the East Valley have at least one, if not more, battery-powered. They're ladder trucks, so we'll utilize those as much as possible. And then what we typically with mid-rise structures is try to, whereas in high-rise fires, it's to be the attack team regardless of whether it's 2 ladders and an engine. We typically, when we're talking about mid-rise fires, it's more important for us to consider concept and actually get in a ladder to BC from the standpoint of the challenges we have associated with not only forcible entry into these different apartments or office complexes or office doors, but also the importance of ventilation on the fire floor may be a huge challenge for us. there to start assessing what we need for ventilation can be very important for us. One more thing to remember, because we do not have, so we know high-rise incidents, we deploy stairwell teams to make sure this is clear before we open the door to the fire floor. We need to do because if we open up the fire floor on floor 2 and contaminate the stairwell and don't send anybody up to check the next 3 or 4 floors, we can have a situation where we have people upstairs above us that end up being a fatality associated with that. And that's what they had in Houston here a few years back as well, where they had a situation like that and they didn't know they had people above them. And so this is one of those situations we talk about now. The challenge is a lot less because when we send somebody to clear that stairwell, it may be 3 floors. So it's not something where you got to go 17 floors above the fire. So it may be, at most, you're probably talking 5 floors that you need to check before opening that door to the fire floor if you can. We talk about actions on the floor above, need for sounding the floor because of potential for floor compromise, and the floor below, obviously, salvage and overhaul is going to be a big factor for us. We've already talked about pre-planning, so we're not going to beat that up anymore. We talk about the challenges associated with this, and this is another thing that Phoenix talks about that they try to consider here, and this is similar to what we talk about with high rises. Labor and equipment intensive situations. Do we take our hose packs, do we hook into the standpipes, and do we bring extra bottles? Because once again, if we go up there and we're on the 4th floor, you know, if you're not familiar with the 3-deep process of the firefighting that Phoenix is well, the volume 2 is now recommending, where we have 1 unit that's deployed into the fire, 1 unit on deck, and 1 unit doing refresh. And then they alternate, obviously they rotate as the first unit comes out on deck, moves in, the refresh goes in on deck, and that's what we're seeing on a lot of our incidents is the 3-unit deployment model. So if we do something like that, if we don't have extra bottles up on the 4th floor with us, you can imagine the time it's going to take for somebody to refresh if they come out of a fire and have to go down 4 floors, find a utility truck somewhere out there, top off a bottle, grab a bottle of water, and come back up, versus having the ability to have some bottles in the stairwell where we come out, we pull our masks off for a few minutes, change out our bottles, take a few minute break, and be ready to go back to work. So just something to consider. We don't typically do that, certainly on apartment fires. We do talk about bringing bottles certainly to high-rise fires, but this is kind of an in-between, a hybrid model where we might want to consider bringing extra bottles. Is there a realistic opportunity for exterior access? And this is one of the ones where it's very different, once again, than a high-rise for the most part, and different from our typical 3-story apartment fires. We're actively going to be looking for different ways to gain access into the apartment to shorten our deployment, hose line deployment situation. And I'm going to show you that in just a second here. But where's the nearest stairwell? I mean, that if we go into a building and we go to the wrong stairwell and we come out in a 300-foot hallway and we're 250 feet away from the involved apartment, we didn't do ourselves any good, right? We're not going to be able to have enough hose to make access into the apartment itself if we need to. So being familiar with that and 60. This is not real simple. We talked about some of these structures as big as a city block. You know, if doing a 360 around a Hyatt, the little 5-story Hyatt, Garden Inn or something like that, may be pretty easy. May be able to drive that 360 very quickly as we give our unseen report. Doing that on some of these other large complexes is virtually impossible. So, but at some point in time, we do need to get a 360, because there are times where on the backside of the structure, especially those with a courtyard and other things, you may need to try to find access to see if we can have any problem on the interior of the structure, or people hanging out on the balconies, which may not be usual. So you can see here, this is a little mid-rise that they had here. And if you look up kind of in the center there, you'll see a couple of people hanging from the window that take a little spill. Now, if you were on the other side of the structure, you wouldn't know any of this was going on, obviously, even though they've evacuated. I mean, now they're out of the building right now, but obviously they need to be treated. But if you look up on the top floor, on that, well, you can't see it right now. Anyway, if the video goes on a little bit longer than that top floor balcony, there's also another guy standing up there. So this is one where if we were on the other side of the structure, we'd never know what's going on this side of the building. It is important. It may not be your crew, and you may get that order from command to conduct a 360, and just make sure that we our due diligence to make sure we see as much of the building as possible in our report, so that we can confirm whether we have fire conditions or victims or people that need rescue at that point. Communication, one of the things they recommend is when you give an on-scene report, use the term mid-rise, apartment complex. The difference there is we get that change the mindset away from just a standard 2 or 3 story apartment complex to a more robust challenges associated with mid-rise fires we've been talking about all morning here. You know, if you're the unseen incident commander, your incident action plan, whether or not you're going to deploy off of your engine with the hand lines, whether you're going to use standpipes and use your attack packs is going to be important as to which type of attack that you're going to do deploy. Accountability is going to be difficult. These are a challenge for us, even with BCs in the sectors. It's going to be a challenge just because you have firefighters and crews disappearing into limited visibility hallways 200 feet deep. It's going to be a challenge. It's going to be hard to make contact with your individuals. You're not going to be able to see them. You may not be able to talk to them. It's going to be difficult, and it's going to be very important that our company officers maintain accountability for their crews at all time, either verbal or physical contact with their crew members at all time. Air management, you know, 200-foot hallways, just like it's not any different than anything else. If we have limited an IDLH in a hallway, you know, we'd have to plan for that ability not only to exit the structure, but be out of the IDLH before we get into our last tactical reserve in that bottle, that last 20, I believe, as we talked about, before we get out of the structure. So this isn't one we want to be working until our bells ring when we're 150 feet down the hallway in a contaminated hallway. And then obviously ladder company considerations, which we'll talk more about in a few minutes here. The forcible entry, ventilation, and search and rescue becomes a huge challenge for us here. And we can see it here. We can see that I know one of the videos here I'm going to show you in a minute, the guy talks about his bottle being his 20-minute life expectancy capsule. And I kind of like that comment. You start thinking about that. I mean, you're literally, it's no different than a scuba diver. If you're in a limited visibility IDLH and you have a situation where you run out of air, you might as well be underwater, because the air you're breathing is going to be contaminated and certainly can disable you very quickly and can be fatal for us if we're not careful. Flow paths, we've talked about that a little bit, but just understand, especially if we have wind-driven conditions, just understand that if we have, it's not unusual for our folks to have, to have the owner, the apartment people that are involved in this to prop doors open, or other people as they leave because they want to be able to get back in if they can't get out of the stairwell. So door control is going to be important for us, and just being aware that if we have wind-driven exterior conditions. Very important for us to get water on the seat of the fire as fast as possible. This is one where we'd always talk about the quickest water is the best water in most situations, but for mid-rise fires, it's even more important because of the sheer number of people that may be involved in the different floors here that may need to be removed or that are currently evacuating in place here. We need to reset the fire when possible. Be careful with the 150-foot rule. Once again, we talked about with the long hallways. Some of the life hazards. This is one of the challenges we talk about in mid-rise fires that's different than a lot of our other types of incidents, even our apartment fires. With apartment fires, typically a 1 or 2 story apartment fire, especially with exterior stairwells, you're typically going to be managing maybe 2 or 3 apartments that may be involved. The involved apartment, the one above, and maybe the one behind if they're connected here or back to back with each other. When you start talking about these type of structures here, you may be talking about multiple floors. You may be talking about literally 50 or 75 people that may be above the fire floor that may need to either be rescued, removed, or protected in place depending on where they're at here. Victims are typically going to be found in your normal egress pathways, typically, as we talked about before, near windows, doorways, elevator lobbies, and hallways are where we're going to find most of the victims as we're conducting our searches. We need to establish evacuation routes, and this isn't much different than a high-rise from the standpoint of once we determine which one's going to be the attack stairwell, we need to identify that and try to send people as we encounter them to the other stairwell so we don't get into that contaminated stairwell, certainly above the fire floor here, where we get people that once again maybe become incapacitated based upon the smoke or whatever in that location. But we also need to understand trying to evacuate the entire building may be a challenge for us as we try to get our crews and our handline deployment to upper floors, maybe a challenge as other people are trying to evacuate. The good thing about residential incidents are due to the degree of compartmentalization, we have less likely to involve the entire floor, whereas in a commercial mid-rise, you may have the entire floor burning at some point in time just because of the open floor plan. With residential compartmentalization, you typically will not see that. You might have one apartment, maybe the apartment across from it if somebody propped the door open of that nature, but we don't typically see the fire involvement on residential, the entire floor being involved. We may have a floor apartment above also may be involved. Handline deployment, and this is kind of where we talk about some different options for us. This is where we talk about some creativity need to come into play. And this is where it's different than certainly our high rises, not that much different than our apartment fires, but any fire located below grade on the first, second, or third floor, we're probably going to be stretching pre-connected lines for deployment. In most situations, you're probably going to find it's faster, going to be able to get them in place quicker than it would be for us to try to deploy standpipe attack packs and get them up there, stretch, do everything we need to do, whether it be a hallway stretch or a stairwell stretch. Going to be a lot quicker for us typically to do a standpipe, a pre-connected handline deployment. But we also need to know exactly where the fire is itself. And this is one of the challenges we have as well, whereas most of our smaller apartment complexes on 1 or 2, maybe 2, 3 floors, especially with an exterior stairwell, we typically can see what's burning because of either it's coming out the door or coming out the windows. We may not see that in a mid-rise because it may be a center courtyard apartment that's on fire. It may be with center hallways and no exterior doorways. We may not be able to turn the exact location of the fire other than we can see smoke from various locations. So it may be important for us to try to determine not only the location of the fire, the apartment that's involved, and then determine once again what's our closest stairwell. So if we come off the truck, that we go into the right stairwell and we can actually reach the fire. Either way, like I say, if we come off the truck and we go up to the 3rd floor, still probably going to be, if you're relatively close to a stairwell and it's only a few apartments in, probably still going to be much faster for us to deploy a hand line than it would be to do a standpipe connection and all the stuff that's associated with that. You can see this is one we coming straight off the truck and going up the stairwell for hand line. Make sure we establish our supply lines, and we need to pump the FTCs of the involved in building as well here. This isn't something where we're going to be coming off tank water on these situations if we can at all help it. If we have a situation where we need to do a rapid transitional attack because we have victims that are close by or something like that, I can probably see a situation where we might bypass a hydrant. But in most situations, I would tell you getting the supply line, getting it set up so that when you make that rapid deployment, especially if you're pulling a 2.5 or anything other than that you'll have enough time to operate here and conduct fire operations before you run out of water. This is the second option you would have is using a standpipe attack, and this is one where we decide for whatever reason, either it's because it's too far down the hallway for us to reach coming off a engine company, that this is going to be one where we're going to try to find the closest stairwell. We're going to deploy the attack packs. So we're going to go up, connect into the standpipe, pump the standpipe connection, get a hydrant obviously, and utilize an attack pack for the fire attack. And so this is an option we have certainly anytime. Certainly as we go above the 3rd floor, probably maybe more indicated and more realistic if we need to, just as an option. And we're going to talk about multiple options here as far as your attack line deployment. So this is one where we maybe do a combination attack. So if we make sure we supply the standpipe, we can see here they've got a supply line. And this is one where not only this is on the 1st floor where we deploy the hand line off the engine company, but maybe the 2nd company comes in, deploys their attack packs off the standpipe to go to the floor above the fire. So there may be a combination attacks depending on the location of the incident. We'll talk about other options as far as aerial handline deployment. If we have a situation where it's going to be faster for us based upon the fact that, once again, maybe it's 150 feet down the hallway away from a stairwell, and we're thinking, hey, we've got a ladder truck out on the scene, and I think somebody was mentioning the other day that I think we can deploy an aerial ladder in about 3 minutes, typically, somewhere around there. Is anybody? Yeah. So if everybody's operating on the same page and an engine ladder shows up at the same time, or ladder shows up first and decides we're going to deploy off the aerial, we may be able to do that. And once again, we talk about a 3-minute deployment. It may be a lot faster for us to come off an aerial than it would be for us to go up 4 floors and come off a standpipe and everything associated with that, trying to get it 150 feet plus down the hallway. Can we go up an aerial, go into the apartment next door or 2 apartments down, come off the aerial and attach our attack packs there and make our fire attack there from that standpoint? Certainly something to consider. Just some things to think about. This is one, the creativity of our engine company officers and the importance of that is going to be critical in these type of events, trying to determine what's going to be the quickest way to get a line deployed into the the fire. We now, traditionally on our standard 1 and 2 story apartment complexes, it's very easy for us to come straight off the engine, and we typically just go in probably the way that most of our occupants come in and out of the building. But in this situation, we're going to talk about other options that we can utilize here that line deployed into the right position even quicker and get the water on the seat of the fire we talk about in the quickest water as soon as possible to knock down the seat of the fire. Other options we might have, can we go through if it's on the ground floor, can we go through the patio door of the unit next door, and instead of going, once again, trying to go through the exterior entrance, going 150 feet down the hall to make entry into the apartment, can we go through the patio door next door and go 40 feet to the involved apartment and make entry? Can we go over a balcony on the second floor, throw up a 24-foot ladder, go to the balcony of the apartment next door, take a line up that ladder into the apartment next door, come outside and make a 25-foot hose line deployment into the involved apartment, once again cutting down our hand line deployment by 5 or 6 minutes maybe, and be able to keep the fire in check and maybe keep it from extending into void spaces or other areas. Can we come in for a rear entrance? Can we go through the adjoining unit through a large window? I mean, there's a lot of options we can do here, and we hope that our folks will use that creativity when we talk about this, where we, if the easiest way and the quickest way to get there is from an exterior nearby apartment, we need to consider doing that. You can see here, just this is one way we can get, if we were to go to the apartment above or whatever, we can certainly utilize the ability to hoist a hose line up at the exterior of the building and make entry into an apartment on the 3rd floor or 4th floor if necessary. If the door in the office or apartment is closed, can we? One of the things we need to consider as well. So if we get deployed into an apartment and we make access into the apartment next to it, and we've got heavy fire rolling out of the apartment, maybe the one next door, can we punch a 12-inch hole into the wall in between the apartments and darken down that fire a little bit, maybe instead of going out in the hallway, opening up that door and contaminating that hallway, and not only are folks facing a well-involved or fully involved apartment, can we darken it down by punching a little hole in between the apartments next door and darken it down a little bit before we make entrance? Just something to consider. Just things we can do to make it safer for us as we make entry and access the apartment, versus just going into the hallway, a large hallway where we may have additional people and occupants, opening that door, contaminating the hallway with both smoke and heat as our crews try to make access to the fire. For example, if we pull up here and this is the involved apartment, you have smoke and fire pressing around this door, and on the other side of the door, obviously on the window coming out, it's fully involved. Can we punch a hole right here and darken it down a little bit, just to introduce some water into that environment, and even from the standpoint of almost a transitional attack at a steep angle there, and get some water up under into the apartment itself and cool things down a little bit before we force that door? We can. Do we? We don't usually, just because we typically will force that door and just fight our way in, but do we need to? Can we make it a little safer for our firefighters as we do that? Same thing with an office complex. If this is now typically that, obviously that glass window would probably fail if it was well involved, but can we punch a hole here or punch a hole here and just get a little bit of water in that environment to cool it off a little bit? Modern fire attack has shown us that if we can get any water into the and cool some of the surfaces and the superheated gases, our chances of preventing flashover are decreasing the conditions and are improving the conditions on the interior of the structure for anybody that may be in there, and certainly for our firefighters as we make entry is could be a very critical thing for us. We'll take a break here, just a couple of minutes here. Attic fires, this is a big challenge for us, especially in the residential mid-rise structure where we have void spaces and attic spaces. We just need to understand that there's large attic spaces here that allows that smoke and not only to translate and transmit between floors, but fire as well. And if we get that fire in the attic space, if we don't get a chance to cut it off at some point in time, it can spread around the entire building and burn the roof off the entire structure. So we need to make sure we try to keep the ceiling intact as best we can to keep the fire vent limited in the attic if possible. And this is a challenge, and some of the modern fire attack stuff that we've been training on, the FRSI training has talked about, if we can't keep limit the amount of air entrained into the attic from below, it's going to be in our best interest to keep the fire more vent limited. Sometimes that may not be easy to do, and we may need to do something like this where we pull enough ceiling that we can get crews to try to cut off the fire. from extending around either throughout the a circular building or a U-shaped building if we can cut it off in maybe the corners. Just some things to think about, but just understand, just like in a residential structure or apartment complex, you need to try to get ahead of it and cut it off if possible, because there's a tremendous amount of volume of attic space that may be involved and can allow that fire to extend above us and throughout the structure if we're not careful. The other thing just to remember here, it talks a little bit about just try to stay ahead of and directly attack the spreading flames and cool the surfaces and the superheated gases. But just also remember, as we spray water into the attic, the potential for the ceiling becoming saturated and collapsing under the living area below is certainly a possibility, and we don't want to do that over top of our firefighters if we can help it. We need to make sure they're aware of it, so that if we're operating that our folks are in a safe location, so we don't have to worry about things collapsing on below. Okay, let's take a 5-minute break if we can. Then we'll come back and finish up the program here. Let's see it. I got 9:20 right now, so if we can come back like at 9:27 or somewhere around there, that'd be great. And if anybody has questions, you're welcome to call me. My cell phone number is 480-798-2929. That's 480-798-2929 if you want to call me, and I can try to answer any questions you may have right now during the break. Or you can unmute your mic and we'll try to answer them right now as well. So if anybody has any questions, otherwise we'll come back in about 5 minutes and continue.
Just you go, quit telling me everything's okay. Quit telling me the water's fine. Quit telling me there's no pollution. Oh my goodness. And there was a pilot called attention to passengers, starboard or port side of the airplane. It looked like a black tornado surrounded by just past Palestine. It was this black cold, nasty. That load was coming through the valley and it passes through. Potential is that Palestine, Ohio. Construction materials. Disrupt traffic.
Okay, let's go ahead and finish up the program here, and we'll talk about some different concerns associated with mid-rise operations. Next one, we're going to talk about some ladder operations, and ladders have become very important, more so in mid-rise maybe than other types of events. A lot of our apartment complexes, they're either short enough that we can throw a 24 or a 35 and get to the roof, or based upon the design and setbacks, we don't have access to it from our aerial ladders if we have a fire in our apartment complexes. High-rise fires, obviously, due to the height of them, we have limited reach on some of our high rises where we can only probably access maybe the 4, 6, or 7. The good thing about mid-rise fires, if we have access, we can probably have access to the majority of the building if we don't have setbacks or something that prevents us from getting near it. So it's important our aerial apparatus have access to the building and that they have that capability of reaching different portions. So if we're one of our ladder company officers and we respond to a mid-rise incident, some of the things we want you to consider as you come up is that exterior size up. Do we have a need for a rescue using an aerial? Do we have victims in windows? Do we have victims on balconies? Do we need to use the aerial for a vertical standpipe as another consideration for us as we pull up? Is this something we're deploying our aerial is going to speed the process of getting the water into the appropriate location? Is there a need for an aerial transitional attack? And that's something we probably wouldn't use a lot, but in certain situations may be indicated, certainly probably in a commercial mid-rise fire. And I'll show you one here in a minute where it may be very appropriate for an aerial transitional attack on something like this. But then also coordinate with command any ladder specific activities if indicated. So if you're the incident commander IC1 and you pull up and there's a need for either a vertical standpipe or you have aerial rescues that are indicated, make sure you deploy your aerial ladders to those locations. And this is also a situation for consideration if we know that we pull up and we have multiple people. Not only do we need to go to a greater alarm, but we might ask the alarm room to add a ladder or two for additional access if we have multiple window rescues that looks to need to be take place. So we talk about that scrub zone. Once again, with mid-rise fires, we have probably reasonable access to a good percentage of, if our ladders can get into the right location, where we have pretty good access as far as that scrub zone to be able to make either effect rescues or to deploy a hand line off the aerial ladder if needed. Once again, another scrub zone depending on where you're located here. We're based upon ladder placement. We talk about victim removal, and this is once again very simple probably for most of us, or for most of you, but just understand that we talk about the importance and ladder deployment and the prioritization of removal of victims. We can see obviously the fire unit is going to be our first priority typically, the unit above the fire, the unit adjacent to the fire, and then any other unit where smoke may be evident. So this would be our deployment prioritization. Some cities throw a lot more ladders than we do. You can see here we've got 3 aerials and 6 ground ladders at least. I don't know the last time that I've been to a fire where we've had more than 4 ground ladders ever in the last probably 20 years. So we don't do this a lot, but if indicated, maybe something we would do. And so if we have victims in the windows that may be totally indicated, we need to be prepared to do this. This is a ladder rescue you can see here on a Midrise, and I think it was LA or one of the cities in California here. But obviously a well-involved department. Got a victim rescue here. Now one of the challenges you'll see on this is a straight stick ladder. But one of the challenges you have is you'll see another firefighter climbing up the bed section of the ladder here in a minute. And why is this a challenge for us as far as deploying a ladder and repositioning or moving a ladder if we got somebody on the bed section? You know, we don't want to get our feet chopped off, right? So if you're on the tip section of the ladder and it's extended out, they can extend the ladder more and it won't typically affect you if we stay out of the pulleys and the cables. But if you're on one of the bed sections and they start extending the ladder, you have the potential for your feet to get caught in between the rungs. And this happened to a firefighter back east here last year. If you didn't see that video, it's pretty interesting to see. But this is a situation where you hope your ladder truck is dialed, that your ladder engineer is dialed in on his apparatus placement. This is another concern we have to be careful of here and try to, if we can, hook ourselves in here, because not unusual for that person to jump to the ladder if things are going wrong, and may take the firefighter on the tip down with them if they're not connected. They did say, yeah, somebody mentioned that they were saying in one of the other classes that they got a little more information. This guy was actually a rock climber, and so it wasn't unusual for him to have the grip strength and not be afraid to climb out the window and work his way down the side. So pretty impressive rescue. We don't do a lot of these. Obviously, we don't do a lot of aerial rescues, but this is one where I hope our ladder companies, if they haven't prepared for this, should be. This is one we want to be ready, make sure that we understand where to place our apparatus so that we have maximum reach, and that we have the ability to, the worst case scenario would be obviously to be parked in the wrong location and be about 10 foot short here. That would be potentially tragic for everybody involved here. But this is another situation, if that victim wasn't there, where we talk about a transitional attack. This is one where we should do something from the ground level while we're deploying other hand lines to the interior to darken this down. And whether that be a 2.5 from the ground level, whether that be a deck gun off an engine, or whether that be a ladder truck with a master stream coming off the bucket, something should be done to this event to darken this thing down as quickly as possible as we're deploying hand lines to the interior of the structure. So just like a residential fire, the quicker we can get this thing darkened down, the quicker we can reduce the heat that's being generated, the heat release rate. We can darken down we can cool down the superheated gases and the surfaces to prevent extension into other floors, into other apartments, into the floors above, into the hallway, and all that kind of stuff. So just some things to think about when we start looking at this type of an event that we need to be able to address the fire in these situations. So we talk about transitional attack with an aerial. Is it indicated? Can be. If we have the ability to deploy a ladder truck in 3 minutes, and if we have a hydrant close that either they can connect to, or certainly an engine company can lay into them, is this a situation while we're deploying hand lines, we're getting hand lines ready to go to the floors above to do a standpipe attack with attack packs? We know that that's probably going to be I would say close to a 10-minute operation between the time they deploy to the floor, grab all their equipment, deploy to the floor, connect either in the standpipe or in the stairwell or on the floor. That we're probably talking about a 10-minute operation. It's certainly something that we could take an aerial apparatus, if appropriate, and darken down that fire from the outside prior to them making entry. Once again, a couple things to consider here, just to think about, is before we make that attack, I think it's this one here, We always have to consider time versus benefit about whether or not we can get that aerial stream into the involved department prior to interior crews gaining access. Can we use a deck gun or a hand line? Would it be more effective? And then the other thing you always have to confirm, especially if you're doing an aerial transitional attack or any type of transitional attack, is just to understand, make sure we don't have crews that are in the involved department or in the hallway with the door open as we make that attack. Even though we're using a straight stream versus a fog stream, we're still going to get some air movement and may have some channel some of the products of combustion back into the hallway if the door is open. Here's a transitional attack that you can see from an aerial here. Not something we do all the time. Phoenix has purchased, I think they've got 3 straight stick aerials. I was wondering why they did this a while back. I saw a couple of them purchased and I thought, why in the world are we going backwards from platform ladders? But they actually have a reason for it. And there's certain areas of their town where they have mid-rises and high rises. They feel they can deploy that for window rescues and balcony rescues faster than they can a platform ladder. So they've got 3 stick aerials, I think 9, 12, I can't remember. Anyway, they've got several of them in their downtown corridor with straight stick aerials compared to platform ladders. So just something to consider for them as well. Aerial access, we talked about some of the challenges that may be associated with that, and that could be whether it be street access, setbacks due to vehicles, parking lots, landscaping, parking garage, other apparatus may keep us from having that access we talk about, and the importance of allowing our aerial apparatus to get close to the building. This is a mid-rise commercial, it's an educational mid-rise, if you want to call it that in Tempe, but you can see obviously that there's not any aerial access to this side of the structure. Certainly you could get to it from this side and the other side because there's a parking lot over on that side, but this side here would be very limited as far as getting aerial access, so that can be a challenge for us. We talk about transitional attack from the ground level. We're very effective at that when we pull up to an apartment complex, probably up to the 3rd floor. We do this all the time and on a regular basis and are very effective at it. But this one I thought was interesting. This is a hand line that's going up at least 8 floors. I'm not sure whether they're pumping it at 1,000 PSI. I'm not sure what it's an 1 3/4 or 2.5. I don't know. But now I'm not saying how effective it would be at the 8th floor, but certainly would be effective at the 4th or 5th floor. And so I don't think we should hesitate to say I'm going to pull a 2.5 and do a transitional attack on a 5th floor of a residential mid-rise. I think it would be very effective potentially if we have access to that. So just something to think about. We talk about creativity and not, we talk about tools in the toolbox and slides in the tray. Just something to think about, some of the options we have. Let's talk about fire attack now for a minute. That first 2 engine, we have to determine, we talk about what's going to be the process as far as what they're going to do. The attack method can be either standpipe or pre-connected lines from the apparatus. And that's typically going to be most effective for the either basement or 1st or 2nd floor, maybe 3rd floor. We need to consider that transitional attack. We talked about being creative and using other means of attack as far as coming in through a balcony, window, or patio next door. Determine with the method of water supply whether we're going to pump the standpipe or make sure it does get pumped. We need to view as much of the structure as possible to take note of the fire location, number of floors, and persons in distress. If possible, we talk about a 360 if we can. If not, we need to get that conducted by somebody else, but take in as much of the building as you can to determine the location. We need to retrieve the building keys, our fob, from the designated location. Once again, it's going to be a Knox box typically, and it may only be on one portion of the building. So our pre-plan will probably tell us where that is, but we need to be prepared to try to locate that Knox box or key fob. Check the annunciator panel if present, and if possible before proceeding to reported fire floor. This may be a challenge for us. We talked about that a minute ago, where it may be difficult to not only to find it, but also whether it's going to have the information we need. But if it is readily available, I would take a look at it. And then proceed certainly to the fire floor to commence firefighting operations. One thing report, we talked about that, calling it a mid-rise, balance early and often. Phoenix requests a high-rise component on their mid-rise incidents because they have additional specialized equipment, battery fans, some additional equipment that they have on their high-rise team. So just a consideration, if you don't do it, somebody else probably will. One of the IC number 2 will probably do that. Don't count on security or RP on the site, no fire control room. Access and forcible entry, probably going to be a challenge for us here, both exterior doors and interior doors. Try to utilize search door control when we're conducting searches, obviously to limit smoke extension into the common areas. Bring your tech. Give PCAN reports. This is going to be important for us. We talk about the importance with PCAN reports on all of our incidents, but certainly here is going to be important for us to get that information as we get to the fire floor, as we get to the fire apartment or the office or the mid-rise if it's a commercial floor. Getting that information back to the incident commander, because these buildings, once again, can hide a lot of information and a lot of the conditions on the interior. So getting that report back to command, whether we have contaminated hallways, whether we have significant heat in the hallways, whether we have multiple apartments involved, whether we have smoke in the stairwells, whether we have fire throughout the floor, or whether it's confined to a individual office or it's the entire floor involved. Those kind of things need to get back. Good PCAN reports are very important for us. Got a comment, Jim, you want to make?
And if I could
Please.
just add to that, Chief,
Please.
A-Shift has put together some nice PCAN report training at the battalion level. I know the shift commanders are working their plans out to get that to all 3 shifts, but I just wanted to point out, folks, and remember, especially for number 1 ICs and sectors, it's the needs component that we kind of fall short on. So and when we think of needs for the incident, think strategic level needs, right? A lot of times we're limited to the box or the room that we're operating in, when really the needs is driving that strategic plan.
Outstanding. Hopefully everybody was able to hear the comments from Captain Barnhart about the needs on the PCAN report, position, conditions, actions, and needs. I think we've also, I know if we've reviewed that in multiple incidents here that I've reviewed, we do pretty good about our conditions and actions. We do okay about our position, but we rarely mention needs. So if you have needs for additional handline, if you need additional crews to come up to complete a search on the floor, or if you need ventilation, you need crews to come up to begin ventilation process or to remove victims or whatever else you have, make sure that you mention that as well, because that's going to be very important for us, especially as the IC number 2 is trying to determine resource deployment and creating a tactical reserve, knowing what kind of needs they have on the fire floor or the floor above or whatever floor you're operating on as a sector officer is very important. And you may find yourself as a sector officer for 10 or 15 minutes at least. So plan on being prepared to talk about whatever the needs of the sector, not necessarily just where you're working at that time. You need to consider all the needs in the sector as well. Mid-rise transitional attack. Here's just another picture of what we could do as far as a transitional attack on a mid-rise. That's on the 4th floor, but very effective. And I can't tell if that looks like maybe a 2.5, but I can't tell. But certainly very effective at the 4th floor and probably up to the 7th floor very easily. There's some setbacks and lack of aerial access you can see here just due to the landscaping and other things, but can we do a transitional attack here? Absolutely. This would be a very easy for us to deploy a handline down here and do a transitional attack, and would cut down probably knock down the seat of this fire, significantly improve conditions on the interior for firefighters going in, as well as any victims that may be in that room in a closed door portion of this building or this apartment, as well as improving the conditions once the folks get up there and make entry into this apartment itself. So this would be a great situation where we could deploy a handline. Couldn't get an aerial here, but we could deploy a handline and do a transitional attack, and should. They do not. And here you can see they're deploying a handline off of the engine company, and it's going to take us a while. You can imagine it's going to take us a while to get up there to I think it's the 4th floor. So you're talking probably another 3 or 4 minutes before they're going to get water on this fire. And this is a situation where we could easily deploy a handline and get this fire darkened down easily long before those folks get up there and make it a much safer operation for everybody involved. This is an incident that occurred just a couple of months ago in California, but this is kind of close to what it looked like on arrival here. So this is a situation, it's a county building. It's on a Saturday, so it's not occupied. But this is something where, once again, I'm not sure how it got this large before crews got on the scene. But this would be a great example of either a aerial transitional attack or a deck gun transitional attack. You've got an open floor plan with a significant fire load. And so before I would want crews to come out of a stairwell and try to fight this fire, I'd love to see this fire darkened down ahead of time with either a ladder truck on a transitional attack, or even just a exterior attack with a ladder truck, or a transitional attack with a deck gun coming off an engine company to darken this thing down before crews make entry into that floor, make it much more tenable. And this is what it looked like obviously a few minutes later, but you can see they've got a significant fire. I don't know if this building was sprinkled or not. I'm assuming it wasn't because unless there was a problem with the system, but you can see if we talk about the number of crews involved, they used 27 engine companies, 5 ladders, and 6 BCs for a total of 110 people to fight this fire on a 6-story mid-rise building. And it's not a very big one. You can see it's not much bigger than what some of our average size overnight hotels and the Fairmonts and other kind of stuff, the hotels you see in some of these places. And so that's a lot of people, and that's for an unoccupied structure. So keep that in mind when we talk about going to a second or a third, not unusual. Search and rescue, this is going to be a challenge for us. It's going to be a huge challenge for us due to the size of these structures. So we talk about getting the water on the seat of the fire as quickly as possible, quickest water, best water, to try to remove the fire from the victims and try to eliminate the hazard. But just understand, especially with commercial fires and the large open spaces and long hallways, it's going to be difficult. And you know, these have been fatal for firefighters, and I mean for certainly civilians and firefighters as well. But we just need to understand that there's challenges associated with these types of structures, and we'll talk about that and conducting these searches here in just a second here. They had a mid-rise fire in Houston. It's been a few years ago, obviously, but they had 3 people killed in that one. And that was a commercial mid-rise. So doesn't, you know, we can't say never as far as having problem with commercial structures, but typically they're less challenging for us as far as people evacuating the building. Understand that our rescue profile is typically going to be based upon most severely threatened, the largest number, those with limited escape routes or methods of removal. Then we protect or shelter in place typically, and then searching the involved floors and the floors above the fire will be our highest priority. A lot of times we find, just because of the size of the structures and the complexity of the floor plans, that finding victims during a fire attack is going to be an action of opportunity versus a dedicated search. And what I mean by that is if we go to a commercial structure with a 10,000 square foot open floor plan, trying to conduct a right wall search is going to be impossible to do. It's not practical to do. A secondary search will be conducted, but it's just not a practical thing to do. You're not going to be able to stretch a line through 84 different cubicles on a floor and try to conduct a right wall search. Now, we can, if we get information about a individual that's lost and that's missing, that is located in the apartment on the northeast corner of the structure, we can certainly deploy units to that location for a targeted search, and we will conduct a search in that location and certainly on our way to that location from where we enter the structure. But as far as just conducting a typical right wall search on a commercial structure, is virtually going to be impossible to do. You may have better chance of doing that on a residential structure, but the problem you have there, once again, if you come out of a stairwell and say, I'm going to do a right wall search, and I've got 35 apartments on this floor in a 300-foot hallway, the time it's going to take you to go to the first apartment, force entry into that apartment, search that apartment, and do that for 35 times it'll be the next shift. So just understand that that's not going to be something that's easy to do. Now, we will certainly, as an action of opportunity, as we work our way down the hallway, if we encounter any victims or people open their doors as we're working our way down, we'll certainly remove those people or remove those victims, certainly, as we make our way down. And certainly if we have a targeted known rescue, we will deploy units and conduct efforts to try to find those victims and remove them. But just understand that due to the size of these structures, it's not going to be practical for us to do a standard right or left wall search, but we will do everything we can to complete a search. It just probably is going to be as we conduct fire control operations. Smoke and fire conditions obviously will determine and dictate the method and order of accomplishing this. Obviously, if we have no smoke in the hallway, it's going to be much quicker for us to evacuate and clear a hallway than it would be if we have zero visibility. And then we have to determine whether we're going to take people away from the fire, or do the conditions dictate putting the fire out and controlling access during our initial search. You know, it talks about here, you know, searching the fire floor, hallway, the apartment of origin, adjacent apartments and the floors above. There's going to be, you know, we're going to conduct our search and try to get those areas clear as possible, as soon as possible. You know, we want to try to evacuate the entire structure as soon as possible, but that may not be practical. We may have to just start with the involved apartment or the involved floor, then the floor above, and then the other, you know, or the other apartments around that, and work our way out from there, depending on the situation and the amount of involvement and resources available. If victims are found, this is another challenge we have. If we find a victim on the 4th floor, how do we get them out? Do we take them, do we protect them in place if they're conscious and there's limited smoke in the apartment? Can we protect them in place until conditions improve? Do we remove them through an uninvolved unit or balcony? Get them to another apartment and take them off a different balcony if possible? Do we remove them via the interior stairs? Do we take them down off a portable ladder or aerial device? Maybe an option for us. Drywall breach into an uninvolved area, maybe another consideration. Just creativity we talk about and some of the challenges. Anybody that's tried to remove a victim down a ladder, conscious is okay. Unconscious, extremely difficult and high risk. We've all seen, and I know I've got multiple videos of firefighters trying to bring victims down, unconscious victim down ladders, and both victim and firefighter falling down to the ground. It's not easy to do. I know that any of you that have ever practiced that in training, especially with those 3,000-pound mannequins that they have out at the training center, sometimes it's difficult. It's hard. It's difficult. It's dangerous. But certainly, if that's what we need to do, we need to be prepared to do that. But just understand if there's other options. If we have an aerial access to that apartment from the 4th floor or something, that we can deploy an aerial to that apartment and take them out down an aerial much safer, much quicker than it would be for us to try to come down either go back through the smoke down a stairwell or something of that nature in a contaminated environment or high heat environment, which is not practical for us to do. We already talked about right and left wall searches versus action of opportunities. We have to consider that people will self-extricate if they know there's an emergency, and if they were capable of evacuating, they typically will. So we talked about this. Obviously, trying to conduct a search in this is be extremely difficult. Not so hard if it was clear, but obviously with limited visibility would be virtually impossible. This is what we talked about doing, conducting a right wall search or something. I mean, if you can imagine trying to follow the red line here as you work your way around this building to try to conduct and that doesn't even complete every inch of this thing if you were to conduct a search. I mean, it's not practical, not possible, not realistic to think that that's something we could do, certainly in a limited visibility or high heat environment. So we're going to conduct our search as we conduct our fire operations, and if we have known victims, we'll certainly deploy resources to that location. But just understand, I don't know that it's not typically very practical to conduct a right or left wall search early in an operation with in these kind of conditions. Large area searches with rope lines. I don't know if you have practiced this in a while. I know I haven't seen it practiced in the agencies that I've been involved in a while. I can tell you the times that I've seen a rope line deployment utilized in a large area search, it lasted about 5 minutes, and everybody got confused and tangled up on everything that around you, and finally just broke it off and either abandoned it or tried to go back to a hand line or something of that nature. But large area searches are not real practical, especially if, once again, if you go back here and think that if you were going to try to conduct this same search with a rope line, I mean, there'd be 75 chairs connected to that rope within about 14 minutes probably, and you'd be hard pressed to find your way back out of there down a rope line or anything else here. Some special considerations for mid-rise operations. Ventilation is going to be a huge challenge. We talked about that before. The primary goal of removing smoke from the heat from the hallways is going to be very important for us. It's just also going to be very challenging. There's not a lot of these windows, especially on commercial structures. The windows don't typically open. Residential structures, you have sometimes we may have a sliding glass door and some other options there that you might be able to conduct some smoke removal. In the involved apartment, we can do hydraulic ventilation, but just understand that trying to clear a 300-foot hallway with limited visibility, trying to get it out of a single apartment with fans, through a 4 by 7 foot door is going to take a while. And so it's going to be a challenge. It's going to require a lot of coordination between ladder companies and other people to make this stuff happen, and to try to do so without creating flow paths if we have still an active fire is going to be a very difficult situation for us to work with. We talked about the difference of making sure we don't contaminate the evacuation stairwell if possible. Make sure we announce which one's going to be evacuation versus attack, and try to keep the evacuation stairwell clear if possible or clean if possible. Smoke spread concerns, just due to the size of these structures, whether it be an open floor plan or long hallways, common hallways, and these types of structures, really easy to contaminate these hallways. You can see here, very difficult. If we were working our way down 6 apartments down here on the left, trying to make access to a fire, if we had a clear hallway, it would be pretty easy. But take this same situation and look at it like this, a much different operation. You can imagine opening the stairwell door on a handline deployment, or even if we came off the engine company and we open up the doorway and this is what we see down a hallway, we've got challenges. We've got challenges not only to clear this hallway to make sure we don't have any victims in this hallway, but trying to work our way down an IDLH, making sure that we have sufficient air to get down there, operate, and get back down and out of the IDLH before our bells ring is going to be difficult. So there's going to be some challenges for us if we have an incident in a mid-rise structure. Roof hatches, present often, but once again, you start talking about limited abilities, you start talking about trying to get smoke from a 300 square foot or 300 foot long hallway on the 3rd floor up to the 7th floor and then out a 4x4 opening, without the ability to pressurize stairwells and pressurize floors. Could be very difficult to do. So just understand that ventilation is going to be a huge challenge for us, and that we may end up, having to use multiple ladders and getting pretty creative on the ability to conduct that ventilation operation. Communications, we always need to follow the order model and everything we do. This is the same for every incident we respond to, is just respond to these types of incidents with utilizing the order model, which is we call, command to engine 201, engine 201, go ahead. Command engine 201, I want you to take an inch and 3/4 to the 2nd floor for fire attack, search and rescue, will be sector 2, and whatever, and they need to repeat it back to you verbatim or as close to it as possible so everybody understands that the order was given, the order was received, and everybody's on the same page. We have accountability for everybody that's involved. Everybody knows where they're going, what their assignment is, their objectives are, so that we know where people are and what's going on here, so we don't have confusion, we don't have accountability problems and challenges that may lead to a mayday. Sectorize early to reduce radio traffic. I know most of the time, most of the people that are probably on this today will be IC number 1, so they will probably have limited sectorization. They may get a 1 or 2 units deployed here. They may get a sector 3 and a sector 4 potentially deployed or something of that nature. But just understand that as the IC number 2 arrives, that they're going to be trying to put BCs in sectors as early as possible and sectorize the event so that once again it can be managed with radio traffic in a reasonable manner, because this could be a really radio traffic intensive operation if we have a couple of floors with multiple apartments and victims that need to be removed. If you happen to be a sector officer, which wouldn't be unusual for a company officer to get a sector assignment process, just understand, because once again, this is a lot of moving parts here as they try to manage this event. Understand that not all communications need to go through command. And when I say that, what I'm referring to is that if you're in the hallway, as you happen to be the sector officer and you're in communications with you're at sector 3 and sector 4 and you're operating in a stairwell or whatever as the sector officer, and sector 4 is just, you might be able to communicate different things to them as far as challenges or other things that are going on, as far as needs maybe that he can help you out with or she can help you out with. But as far as anything, as far as changing conditions, any benchmarks that are attained, need for more resources, life safety issues or injuries, they'll all have to go through command. So just understand, if you're a sector officer and any of those things come up, that needs to go through command. Other things you might be able to relay through forth or communicate through the sector officer face to face if that's an option in certain situations. But that's not always possible for engine company officers versus when the BCs get there and they move back into a different type of position as far as the sector management. Accountability, we talked about the challenges here. This is going to be difficult when you have a situation where you have large size, either whether it be an open floor plan, long hallways, numerous offices, living spaces. You may be operating on multiple floors. Very challenging to maintain accountability for the incident commander, IC number 2 especially. So it's very important you as a company officer maintain accountability for your crew members, especially if you're in a limited visibility situation or a situation that may become that. Make sure that you have direct accountability for your firefighters on your crew, so that we don't get anybody lost. Because this is once again, that may be a challenge for us to, in a limited visibility environment on a commercial floor plan, especially trying to locate or remove a victim would be challenging, but could also be a difficult situation if conditions change and we get a flow path change or something of that nature on a residential structure, and we have firefighters we can't account for as to their location. So make sure that we enter and exit together as crews, and know we have accountability for our crew members at all time. This is a video from a Mayday incident that occurred in Houston. I'm going to let it run here so you can listen to it. There's a viber alert going off. Not getting audio? Okay, well, it looks like for some reason, I'm not sure why on this one, we're not getting audio to those in Teams, but I'll summarize this a little bit for you. This is a captain from the Houston Fire Department that was dispatched to, I think it's a 5-story mid-rise commercial structure. Him and his crew made it to the 5th floor. They started to deploy a hand line, needed some more lines, so he sent his 2 crew members back to get some additional hand line. He got off on the floor because there was reports of victims trapped on the 5th floor. He got off the hand line, or got out onto the floor itself, and thought he'd just search a little bit of the room with 0 visibility. As he just got out there for just a few feet here and tried to work his way back to the stairwell. He opened a door, thinking it was the stairwell door, and got moved into an office, and the door locked behind him, and he couldn't get out. His viber alert was activated. He was run out of air. He declared a mayday. The incident commander, they missed his initial mayday. The alarm room heard it and relayed the mayday to the incident commander. They sent crews up to find him. His 2 crew members came back up the stairwell, opened the door, and couldn't find him, and were unable to locate him. He said he was talked about whether or not he utilized the grab lives or anything else. He said at the time didn't think about a lot, just because of his viber alert was going off. He was run out of air and just didn't really have a lot of options at that point that he thought he could utilize. So he got up against an exterior door or window of the building and tried to advise command of his location. He was a little bit confused as to the location of where he was at. As far as he knew, it was against an exterior window, but he was confused as whether he was on the north or south side or something, I believe. Anyway, somewhere in the process, he tried to break the window out, but these windows you can't break out a commercial window, obviously, without a significant amount of tools or some significant work. And he said by that time was out of air and exhausted. Fortunately, and this is kind of an unusual situation as well, one of the ladder trucks, the stick aerial, was outside, saw his flashlight move around in the window one time in a smoke-filled window, and actually drove the tip of the aerial through the window into the area where he was operating. They were able to get him and bring him off the aerial, which I'll kind of show you here in a second. Here they got him, took him out of the building down in the aerial. You can see right here. I'm going to mute the mic here because nobody can hear it out there anyway. But you can see they busted the window, and they're bringing him out now through over on the aerial here to take him down out of the building. So obviously he survived the event. And you can see they brought him out here, but he was just talking about a number of things that we talk about. He separated himself from his crew, limited visibility, was operating in the building with his viber alert going off in an IDLH. A number of things should have been red flags that certainly led to this mayday. I'm not going to Monday morning quarterback it because I know it could happen to a lot of us in different situations, but certainly there was a number of warning signs that could have prevented this from happening, and unfortunately it didn't. It occurred, but he survived the incident, but this was a close call. If they wouldn't have got him when they did, he was probably pretty close to succumbing to the smoke in that environment here. So elevator usage, we're going to talk about that just briefly. We've already talked about not recommended for most of our mid-rise incidents, basically because we're talking about most of these structures being 5 or 6 stories at most. And in a high-rise incident, they recommend, unless you're over 10 floors, not even to consider it. And also because a lot of these mid-rise elevators don't have the same protection features that high-rise elevators do. So they suggest, unless other than moving equipment and and maybe personnel later on in the operation after things have been evaluated that probably not utilize the elevators at all. Forcible entry, this is going to be a challenge for us, and this is where we talk about the importance of a ladder company going to each floor with the attack team, as we have solid core doors or metal frame doors, not easy to get through for one, much less trying to get through 15 on a floor. The ability to find a master key or key fob that works all of these doors will probably be limited. You may have one total available for the entire operation. So being in a situation where having a ladder company there with a set of irons or even a rabbit tool, if available, may be critical for us to gain access to these different portions of the building if needed here. Also, you may have access just getting into the structure itself. You can see this is one that has an exterior stairwell, but they have a caged access here. They do have a Knox key that allows us to get through here, but you can see each one of the floors has got key fob to get in the building from there. So even if we get through this gate, and then if we prop it open so other later arriving companies can get through there, we're still going to have challenges getting into the floor and then getting into the apartment itself. This is what an exterior door looks like on a lot of these mid-rise structures. So you see this and you go, well, what does that get me into? Does that get me into just the first floor? Does that get me into an apartment? This actually gets you into a vestibule that gets you into a stairwell, but then you have to have a key fob to get out of the stairwell onto the floor, and then obviously a key fob or key to get into the apartment. But that's what a lot of times you'll find it. It may be indiscreet. There's no markings on it that tells you this is access for the stairwells. It doesn't tell you this is access for floors 1, 2, and 3 or whatever else. There's no markings at all. So this is where we talk about some of the challenges. So checking for extension, just understand that for mid-rise construction, especially wood frame construction, lightweight wood frame construction, is not only do we have to check the area involved in the area above, but we also may need to check some of the void spaces in different locations around the structure. Not unusual for some of these structures to have a fire on the 3rd floor and eventually see smoke being produced on a 5th floor. And, you know, on the opposite side of the building, a 5th floor bathroom may start. You may see smoke coming from an outlet or something on a different portion of the building, and you found that it's just extended through different channels and different void spaces and may be extending to a different location. So much more complicated than a lot of our standard operations. Certainly nothing we would see on a high-rise incident, but we might see on lightweight constructed buildings. Lightweight concrete can collapse also. If we start talking about some of the floors, lightweight concrete floors, they are not going to be the same protection that you would see on a high-rise structure. So if you have heavy involvement, you can see here, this is a incident that where they had structural collapse on a lightweight concrete floor here. I think it was during construction, but you can see that it's not unusual or it's possible anyway for lightweight construction to also collapse. Just something for us to consider. On deck with rescue responsibilities. This is going to be a challenge for us just because we've got multiple floors. Where do we put that on deck with rescue responsibility company? Ideally, I would tell you that when we're doing the 3 deep deployment model where we have 1 deployed, 1 on deck, and 1 in refresh, that I would tell you ideally to have a RIC bag and tool bag on each one of those floors where you're operating, so that if something goes wrong, that you have the ability to deploy a RIC team or convert one of your on-deck teams to a rescue sector or a RIC team and have an SCBA bag or airbag and a tool bag with them. Because obviously you can imagine if we declare a Mayday on floor 5 and we don't have a RIC bag and a tool bag there, I mean, it's going to take us 10 or 15 minutes probably to round one up and get it up to the 5th floor. So not our best situation. Defensive operations, this is just a little bit of Captain Obvious stuff. Just remember, put away the 1 3/4 operations when we're trying to work on when we have mid-rise fires that are going to be a defensive operation. Go with the deck guns, the portable monitors, ladder pipes. Make sure we stay out of the collapse zones. Obviously, when we get these types of incidents, we shouldn't be operating in the collapse zone with an 1 3/4 fire or hose line. Mid-rise under construction. This is you can see here. Just I would say that we've got a lot of these things. They're miniature. I wouldn't say miniature. I guess some of them are massive stick farm incidents. No different than an apartment stick fire. We have a stick farm that's 3 or 4 story apartments that we have built all over the place. I know that right now there's probably 5 of these under construction in Tempe. I know there's a couple under construction on Main Street in Mesa. I know there's several in Gilbert under construction that look like this. But just understand that when these structures are under construction, they're obviously very dangerous. You can see here, this is They've got lightweight construction over non-combustible lightweight concrete. You can see all the jacks under here. And obviously we saw some workers still over here working. They need to be evacuated, but you can see here, this I think is Oklahoma City or someplace, but you start talking about this being unsafe to operate on. Obviously, if we have compromise of this lightweight concrete floor, which hasn't cured yet because it still has all the jacks under here, that we probably shouldn't be operating above it here. So this is one that we're going to stay defensive and should stay defensive. Get outside the collapse zone. We may be a little close to the collapse zone on this side here, but we need to be careful with that. But you can see as this fire develops here a little bit that it gets a little bit bigger. But you know, you may need to deploy some ladders to get the workers off the floors if they still happen to be up there and haven't worked their way down yet. But this should be a defensive operation only. Here's some incidents that have occurred locally. This was in Tucson down here. Just some things to think about. You know, you've got a bunk of OSB over here hanging off the side of the building. Just, you know, be careful, as you know, we won't want to be operating below that here, depending on what may be on fire here. We don't, there probably won't be, even though they may be installing sprinklers, they're probably not going to be active. If they've got standpipes, they may not be connected or completed. And just understand that, you know, with some of the jacks and other things that any fire protection features that you may have probably aren't functional at this point in time and need to be careful about making entry. The one down the bottom left is just a roofing material fire that they had in Tempe. Looked very, very impressive, obviously, but it was primarily just styrofoam and other things that were up on the roof of a mid-rise under construction that caught fire. This is a new challenge. You can see here, Phoenix built one of these. It's a 5-story shipping container structure. You know, I know that they were talking, I'm not sure what they're going to do with them, but I know the governor was talking the other day about repurposing the shipping containers that were on the border and utilize them for low-income housing. So, you know, we may need to become more familiar with operating in shipping container fires at some point in time. I don't see these popping up everywhere, but one exists in Phoenix already, so we need to be at least aware of it, and maybe something we need to consider in the future. Please. Okay. Yeah, there's just opened up. I saw that. Yeah, drive by it. Yeah, it's a shipping container. It's at Power and Superstition Springs Parkway, just a little bit south there. Just saw it the other day, so I saw it on the news and I saw it and I went, wow, that's different. But so we may see more of those commercials as well. It's going to be yeah, exactly. You got a built-in flashover chamber for us at Dunkin' Donuts. Parking garage fires. We're not going to spend a ton of time here, but just be aware of them. These can create some serious challenges because a lot of these mid-rise fires or mid-rise structures have either parking garage below it, inside it, underneath it, in the middle of it. So, you know, I know Chandler was talking about they've got a large donut-shaped situation where the courtyard is all parking garage. So other than one entrance, or I think he said 2 entrances from the exterior, you drive through what looks to be a residential Type 5 constructed building, and you drive into the parking garage, which is 6 levels on the interior of a center courtyard. So you can imagine trying to fight fire. How are we going to get lines deployed into the center courtyard of a parking garage in the middle of a 5-story mid-rise lightweight construction building? So some serious challenges. So we'll talk briefly about some parking garage challenges. They talk about above ground, below ground, attached to the building. A number of different types of parking garages. You may or may not have fire protection systems. You may have sprinklers. You may have standpipes. You may have most of these structures. They do have access from the parking garage into the living space through common areas through stairwells and other things, through doors that may be propped open, may or may not be fire rated. You can see here, this is the donut style parking garage, the thing like that Chandler talked about that they have here. You can see they got entrances here on ground level, and then they have the residential portion on the exterior of the building, and then the garage in the middle. So this could create a huge problem for us, especially if people prop doors open that allows that smoke to get straight from the parking garage level into a open floor into the common hallways of a mid-rise structure, which could obviously create some huge problems for us from an evacuation standpoint or rescue standpoint. Could be a big problem. And if you can imagine, also we'll see parking garage fires with vehicles involved. If you haven't been to them before, they're very interesting. They create a lot more smoke than you think they do. And if you have multiple cars burning, which also is not unusual, to see an entire floor of zero visibility in a parking garage with zero visibility smoke especially underground, which I've been to, and I'll tell you that story in a minute here, but is very unusual, very different, very disorienting, and high risk, these events when we go to them. So just understand that any minor vehicle fire could certainly cause a toxic cloud to get into our smokes, into the hallways, occupied areas of the building, and create a huge problem for us. Not only fighting the fire, but a rescue problem on the building itself. Access, just understand that these fires, once again, can have multiple vehicles, multiple levels if necessary. Be careful as we go through these parking, the gates into these parking garages, as they're very large, very heavy, and obviously if we have significant fire, which I'll show you one in here in a minute, may damage the controlling mechanism or springs and allow these doors to come down and trap us inside. So there is concern about that, and we need to make sure that we secure these doors with possible. Fire attack, if we have an exterior or above grade accessible parking garage, we can use standpipe attack for these types of events. But you'll find, I know I have in actual deployment, that it's faster in most situations to deploy right off the truck than it is to do a standpipe operation. But you may have to, based upon the location of the fires, where it's at, whether it's above grade, below grade, whether you can get pre-connected lines straight from the engine company. But typically that's probably going to be your fastest versus an attack pack. Another challenge you have is some of these floors, the garage floor levels, may be hundreds of feet across, and a lot of them have mid-parking garage floor standpipes. Once again, we talked about that it's accessible, and it gives us that access to all portions of the garage, but also understand that if things go wrong, we follow the line back to the middle of the parking garage, and it doesn't get us out of the building. So we need to be careful about that. It may also be a situation where I guess we'll talk about that in, I think, a slide or two here. So if we need to bring up a line from the exterior, once again, coming off a truck, bringing up a line from the exterior like this is probably going to be much faster for us to deploy than to try to come up and deploy our attack packs and pump a standpipe. So just things to consider here. Slides in the slide tray. Do we deploy a line up a portable ladder? If the stairwells are quite a ways away from where the involved vehicles are, can we deploy a ground ladder, throw a ladder up, pull a inch and 3/4 or a 2.5 inch line, depending on what's necessary or indicated, go up straight up the ladder for deployment? Can we deploy, straight off the engine company? We talked about that, pumping the FDCs and stuff, and then deploy straight off the engine company is another option for us. A lot of these are sprinklered, but then we have the cold smoke issue. So just understand that we still may have a limited visibility, zero visibility environment where you have gray smoke, and you'll actually work your way through the parking garage, which I've been to a couple of times, through zero visibility gray smoke, and then you finally get to reach through a thermal imager or just by just conducting your regular search, you end up finding the involved cars, and then try to access and extinguish a car fire in zero visibility, which is not that easy to do. We talk about it. Obviously, when we're outside and we put out car fires, we have the ability to work out of the smoke and get to the hood latches and other things like that. But you do the same thing in a zero visibility environment, it's not as easy, more challenging. So things to think about there as far as just being able to extinguish that fire and some of the challenges of conducting a car fire attack in a zero visibility environment. Can we use the aerial access to bring our hose line hose lines off the aerial? Another option for us. Access, just understand most of them have metal security gates. A lot of them are broken. Seems like about half the ones that my kids have ever lived in are always broken, but some are certainly operational. They talk about if you can secure the overhead doors so that it can't come down, just to make sure that once again it doesn't close and trap our folks inside. Just understand construction fire protection features may or may not have sprinkler systems, may not have standpipes in the middle of the floors. Be careful with using a residential versus a commercial mentality. These structures can be huge. The parking floors can be hundreds of feet across, maybe zero visibility locations with multiple obstructions. If you figure you've got hundreds of vehicles parked on some of these floors, and you're trying to stretch a line 150 feet into a zero visibility jet black environment, it can be difficult. And not only is it difficult for us to deploy those lines, but to follow, to make sure we stay on those hand lines and not get disoriented and get lost on the way out of those structures. Because while it seems like you go, hey, it's open, there's not going to be a problem for us, I can tell you I've been to multiple garage fires where it is zero visibility to the floor, until you get a significant distance away from the involved portion of the vehicles. I mean, where the vehicles are involved. So you need to make sure we kind of treat this with a commercial mentality, make sure we're out of the smoke and IDLH before we run out of air, and obviously before our bells or vibro alert wings. We got above ground considerations, below ground considerations. Quick story time with Pat here. We had a 3-level parking garage down at Millen University on the northeast corner several years ago when I was a staff officer. Responded out where they had a first alarm for a parking garage fire, and they deployed me down as a sector officer. And I remember going down just 3 levels and 0 visibility at the 2nd level, and it was jet black on the 3rd level below grade. And there was, I mean, you could not see anything. There was no way to get they didn't have operational fans in this parking garage, and it took us probably at least 20 minutes to put out the car fire, and probably took us an hour to evacuate all the smoke. The other challenge you have is, what do you do if you need to search the floor? What happens if somebody says there's somebody on their phone that's in the parking garage that can't see out their vehicle, and they're trapped? You know, they get 0 visibility. They're inside their vehicle. How do we get to them? How do we find out where they're at? How do we, search a whole floor of a parking garage to try to find the one person that's stuck in their vehicle that panicked and now it wasn't black when they got in the vehicle. Now they can't find their way out. I mean, it could be a challenge for us. So just things to think about. It takes a long time. Stay on the hose lines. Just understand putting out a car fire and 0 visibility is not as easy as it is out on the street, and some of the challenges associated with that. The parking garage may span the entire building floor plan, multiple floors, sprinkler but not ventilated. Stay on hose line. Basically, it's an underground warehouse with large open space and 0 visibility is what some people talk about parking garage fires. So this is an incident. Once again, you probably have seen this one. It's a very famous incident that occurred. This is, I think it's Houston once again, or California, no, sorry, Texas, either way. But you can see this engine and ladder 16 were actually on another call coming back from this. This call has not been called in yet. And you can see the sheer amount of smoke of this event that is occurring here. And you can see they still haven't dispatched this incident, but they've got 3 units now responding. But I'll speed it up just a little bit so you can see here. Very interesting if you see just the sheer volume of smoke. This is a parking garage fire that's on the 1st level of I think it's a 4-story apartment complex here. But this is like 4 vehicles involved here, and you can see, look at the amount of smoke and fire pushing out of this parking garage on the 1st level. So we talk about door failure. Once again, be careful. You push that door up and you get inside there and the springs fail, that door comes down and you're not getting out. Anybody that's ever tried to lift their own their own garage door, even just an aluminum garage door, and the springs fail, realize how heavy it is. So there's no way you'd be able to do that. But just look at the sheer volume, pressurized smoke coming out of this building here. It's hard to tell, but there's like four levels of residential apartments above this. They, I think, end up completing 12 exterior rescues from ladders on this event here, and people trapped inside the building. Obviously, the smoke was working its way through the building, up stairwells inside the building itself. And like I say, this hadn't even dispatched the event yet here on the alarm yet, and they've got 3 units on the scene and trying to affect a rescue. I mean, to affect multiple rescues. But you can see here just a huge challenge. I mean, if you look at the smoke here, you can't even see the building behind it. Spectacular. So we talk about 0 visibility because you have car fires. Don't downplay the risk associated with car fires here. We'll move forward here a little bit. You can see here they had multiple ladder rescues off of aerials and ground ladders both. But this is the difference in the building. You can see what it looked like with the smoke and the parking garage fire, and this is what it looked like with the smoke gone. So being familiar with your first 2 areas is important here as well. I thought this one was interesting just because this is a donut-shaped mid-rise fire in the UK. 1,400 vehicles destroyed in a parking garage fire. I mean, that's amazing. If you look at this, look at the spalling of the concrete. I mean, that whole parking garage is compromised as far as, I mean, how do we, I mean, I couldn't imagine having 10 cars burning in the middle of an apartment complex, much less 1,400, to try to figure out a way to extinguish and not keep that fire from getting into each one of the apartments on the various floors of this mid-rise structure, the residential portion of this structure. So, just something to think about. So let's talk about if we get an incident like this. If we were to reply, we're just about done here. We're going to just talk about just some tactics on this. But if we were to pull up on this event right here, What's going to be our initial attack? What's your thoughts here? And you guys that are online, if you want to unmute and give your opinion, please do so. But what would be some of the things you'd think about? What are you guys thinking about what we're doing as far as an attack here?
Transitional.
Okay, so we're saying transitional attack in here, and we're saying a transitional attack engine in 3/4 or 2.5. What would you think? Either one, I think it's going to be fine here. I mean, it's going to be an apartment, so we're not talking about, 3,000 square feet. You're probably talking about a 700 square foot, 800 square foot apartment. So probably an 1 3/4 would work. But if you happen to have it, a 2.5 would work very well as well. So we're going to darken this thing down, right? So that's going to be our first thing we're going to do here is doing a transitional attack. If we have turbulent boiling smoke out of that window next door, I'm also going to darken that one down. And when I say that, we talk about cooling surfaces and cooling superheated gases as well. One of the things, if you read and listen to much of the modern fire attack stuff, they'll tell you that it's very important that we cool the superheated surfaces just as much as we cool the superheated gases, because otherwise the fire just builds back up as soon as we knock it down. Did I hear somebody comment online? Did somebody have a thought? Okay. Yeah, no, you're fine. So just some things to think about. So our first line is probably going to go here as far as just our deployment. We need to pump the standpipes and sprinkler systems, obviously, in this process. Second line, do we throw up a 24-footer or 35, whatever we have here, and maybe make entry in here as far as deploying a hand line, 1 3/4 here? Because if we look at the access, there's no access on this side of the building for the front of the building. So we're either going to have to go back down here, down the hallway here, work our way up the stairwell, wherever that may be here or around this side. How quick would it be for us to throw a 24 or a 28 or a 35, come up here, go through this apartment right here, and now just go down, 40 feet and make an attack here after we get it darkened down? Could we shorten our deployment time by 5 minutes maybe? At least 3 or 4 minutes as we're trying to figure out how to get there, trying to figure out where the key fob is and everything else. Could we just maybe consider something? And these are just considerations. These aren't hard and fast, but these are just some things to think about when we start talking about getting creative and shortening our line deployment time as far as getting lines into the place and getting the quickest water, best water. Second line, the third line, maybe we deploy it up here with coming off of the standpipe. We take a 2.5 off the standpipe maybe, and come in to the floor above here if we go off the standpipe. Or do we throw up the aerial, maybe come off the aerial here? Just some things to think about. We're just trying to get you thinking. We're trying to think, get you looking at all the tools in your toolbox to try to deploy these hand lines to make sure that we have the ability to get the water on the fire as quickly as possible, get the fire knocked down, keep the smoke and fire from spreading to other floors, other apartments, or up into the attic and through void spaces. All the things we've been talking about today. We're just trying to think of different things we can do to try to darken things down, get things moving as quickly as possible, get the water on the seat of the fire so that we can limit the amount of exposure that all the residents have that are on the fire floor, the floor above, and the other floors from being exposed to the toxic environment. Any thoughts from anybody online or anybody other thoughts in here? All right. Fourth hand line probably backs up the third hand line probably backs up the initial attack team and works on searching the other apartments around that one. How about this one here? What do we think here? Deck gun, okay. It's probably going to be the easiest thing, right? So we got a fire on, what is that, the 1, 2, 3, 4, probably 5th or 6th floor. I can't, let's see where we at. 1, 2. It looks like probably 6th floor here. Looks kind of like we showed the picture of the one in California earlier. No cars in the parking lot. Doesn't mean there's not anybody there, but at least it means probably less of a concern for us, at least as we're conducting our search here. So a couple of options. The first one we can consider, if we want, a 2.5 maybe as a transitional attack would be an option. Certainly that option with a deck gun transitional attack would be certainly very indicated here. Would be something we could easily do and try to get that fire knocked down, because this is one we're probably not going to be coming off the engine and going up to deploy a hand line off the engine itself, just due to the distance and being on the 6th floor. So we're probably going to be looking at deploying lines off the standpipe on this one. So it's going to take us a while. It's going to take us, probably 10 minutes by the time we round up all of our stuff, work our way up to the 6th or the 5th floor, connect into the 5th floor, and deploy our hand lines onto the floor. And we talked about before, is this going to be an open floor plan or is this going to be compartmentalized? It depends. This may be some commercial structures have offices on the floor, and then other ones have certainly offices around the outside, maybe in a center area that's got the cubicle farm. So there's a number of things to consider, but this is one where if I've got significant fire like this showing, I'm going to try to darken that down with everything I can before deploying crews onto that line. You know, can we do a transitional aerial attack? Another option for us? Just things to think about. These aren't necessarily hard and fast. It doesn't mean Chief Bailey says every time you go to one of these that you got to do this, this, or this. I'm just saying, throwing some things out for you just to say, hey, consider knocking this thing down before you go up there, because opening the floor on the 6th floor 10 minutes into this thing and you've got a volcano in there, it's not going to be easy for us to work our way out on the floor and get an effective attack if we don't darken this thing down a little bit. So this is just something to consider. These are all just options to consider. And then at some point in time, obviously, we're going to need to get a couple of 2.5s up there into the coming off the standpipes and to make our fire attack and to certainly finish up the operation. But just things to think about. Just things that we're hoping that you're going to consider. Options to consider. Just understanding that once again, you know, this is probably going to be a type 2 non-combustible structure, so you're not going to necessarily have the problems of you probably won't necessarily have an attic. You're probably not going to have the problems with falling through the floor here. You may have floor collapse potentially at some point in time, but probably not initially a concern for us. But it's going to be a challenge for us to get water up there, a significant amount of water up there to attack this fire in a commercial fire. So other thoughts, anything else you guys can think of, other suggestions, other challenges you would see on this here? Please.
I feel like I'm hearing Paul Liddell.
I'm with you, please, yes.
No, just the platform attack. I've always said, like, this is my dream scenario.
Sure.
But as attack teams are moving up to the 5th or 6th floor, standpipe connections, that platform certainly would buy us all the time in the world to get those lines in place. Just going over in my head, I'm thinking about communication, right? Before we want to open up that platform, we want to communicate to the crews on that fire floor. Just let them know what we're doing, and then really the outcome of the transitional attack before they ever open up that hallway, the stairwell.
And this
to the hallway.
Point about mentioned it a little bit earlier, but this is one where absolutely are deploying any of these, but primarily certainly the aerial master stream, because they have the ability to not only do just the transitional attack coming off the ceiling, but they have the ability to come up at the same level and actually attack some of the fire on the fire floor itself. But we definitely would want to be communicating that, just as Captain Barnhart talked about with the attack crews. We don't want to have a situation where we've got crews opening up stairwells here and onto the fire floor here, and then have a ladder truck get up there and start using a medium fog through the exterior of this building and pushing all kinds of products of combustion down into the stairwells and creating flow paths and other changes here for us. So this is one where, and if they're effective, this may even be one where communication is we have them holding the stairwell, just keep it in check in the stairwell for a few minutes and let the ladder truck go to work. Let them do some work and knock this thing down, darken it down, and not only do the transitional attack, but maybe let them work for 5 minutes up there and get this thing as much as they can reach and get it darkened down here. Unless we've got a known rescue or something on that floor, that may be the best thing we can do, is to get 1,000 plus GPM on this floor versus 250 coming off of 2 hand lines, in a limited area and exposing our people to these deteriorating conditions potentially. So I would tell you this is something, and communications is important in all these, because the transitional attack, if we're using an 1 3/4 transitional attack, and we're doing it, and we're not moving it around and swirling it around doing other things, they've shown that it's relatively safe to be operating in the house. I wouldn't necessarily say in the same room here, but you probably even could do that, but certainly in the house and in the hallway with that going on. But anytime we start changing things to a fog or start whipping things around, now we start changing flow paths and we start moving air, and we have to be a little bit more careful about that. But if we're communicating, if command advises the aerial company to go ahead and deploy their apparatus and darken down the fire and do a transitional attack, and he gets on with the attack teams and tells sector 6, we want you to maintain your position in the stairwell, go ahead and charge your lines and be prepared with to make attack, but just we want you to maintain that stairwell position until we advise you. I think that's would be very appropriate. I think that's something we could be very effective. Would be probably an excellent opportunity to darken this fire down, or even extinguish the majority of this fire before putting our people at risk and putting them out on this floor. So just things to think about. We're saying this isn't automatic, a guaranteed thing. This isn't absolute. This is just saying here's some options to think about. Here's some tools in the toolbox to consider on these types of events. So in conclusion, just understand that a fire attack should be made from the most advantageous position. We talked about that. Is that going to be maybe coming off the engine company, going through the first floor and and down the hallway, it may be coming off the engine company going up a 24-foot ladder to the apartment next door. It may be coming off a standpipe and deploying attack packs. Just depends on the situation, depends on the fire, depends on the fire ground factors and all the other things involved. Most situations, not always, but in most situations, the best thing we can do to protect our victims and everybody in the building is to get the quick water on the fire. The quickest water, the best water in most of these situations. If we can get that water in there, and while simultaneously, especially if we have known rescues or window rescues, if we can get that fire knocked down, it's going to benefit everybody in the building. The quicker we can get things knocked down and limit the amount of smoke being produced and the fire from spreading into void space is going to be the best thing we can do for everybody. Be prepared for unplanned ventilation actions. Understand that we may have a hostile fire event, especially if we have wind-driven conditions outside. If the door is left open, there's a number of things that can happen. If a window fails, that can change the dynamics inside these structures very quickly, especially in our residential structure, long hallway situations where we may have a flow path becomes very readily apparent in a matter of just seconds and may put our people at risk. And we talked about safe areas of refuge. Consider creating those as well if we can't just get back to the stairwell in a very rapid situation. Ventilation will be difficult. Just understand that. We know it's going to be a challenge, and it's going to be more of a challenge than it is. I would make it akin to what we try to when we try to remove smoke from a big box fire. Very difficult to do. Anytime you have a situation where you have limited openings, limited ventilation capabilities, and trying to remove smoke from these structures is not as easy as it sounds. So just keep that in mind that it's going to be a challenge, and we may be exposing additional residents and other people to these products of combustion the longer that things are allowed to happen. Pump to standpipe and sprinklers. Once again, a lot of these buildings will not typically have a fire pump. So you may have dry standpipes and water city pressure only in their sprinkler system. So make sure we pump the standpipes and sprinklers, and that means every one of the ones that's involved in the area we're working in. Use caution above the fire, especially on our lightweight construction. The floors may be compromised. Check for extension early. Look for lots of void spaces. Consider early requests for a minimum of a first alarm and potentially a second alarm on these type of events. They are manpower intensive, and understand that mid-rises are not short high-rises. For those of you that may want to see any of our other Tactical Tuesday archives, we do have a QR code here that you should be able to scan, and it should bring you to our YouTube page where all of our Tactical Tuesdays, our other 17 modules should be there. So hopefully it'll work, and I know it worked for me on my phone, but that'll bring you back to all of our previous 17 modules of Tactical Tuesdays. If you have questions, you're welcome to unmute your mic right now and ask the questions if you have anything. If not, I would tell you certainly to check with your responding battalion chief if you're from another agency. You also can call East Deputy, certainly if you're with Mesa Fire. You're welcome to call me if you'd like, if you have questions about something I may be able to answer, or I can probably find information and provide it for you. But just understand that the information we covered today is coming out of Volume 2, the Midrise policy that was approved recently. So this should be some of the latest information in addition to research from multiple websites and other information that's out there. So we appreciate you, any of you that have stayed online here with us, and hope that this was beneficial for you. And do we have any questions before we wrap it up? Anything from anybody else?
This is Klemke. Sorry, Chief. I got one question for you.
Please, yes, please.
So that last scenario, that 6-story commercial structure fire kind of in the middle of the central corridor access in one of the exterior stairwells. It seems like, and my question is specific to your thoughts on evacuation happening naturally. Yeah. Can you hear me or no? Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead. You're saying this one here. Go ahead. Yes, please.
Oh, sorry. So my question is about the natural evacuation. To me, would be predictable where people came in down that central area where the elevators are. Sure, so if that fire contaminated that stairwell, my thoughts for my crew, if I'm ascending to that 6th floor, to take one of those exterior stairwells so I possibly don't have to breathe air on the way up, have a spare bottle, and then make, fire attack from that direction. What are your thoughts on that?
Are you talking about this one here, or are you talking about the commercial one?
No, the last one you did, the commercial one, not the residential.
Okay, so you're talking about this one here. You're talking about taking the lines up the stairwell and as we make entry so we can not have to breathe air as you're working your way up. Is that what you're saying? Yeah,
I'm saying take one of the exterior, not the central. Plus,
I would agree. The only challenge you might have a little bit with that would be just the amount of hallway or stretch you might have to get if you're coming off of one of the on one of the stairwells. It's probably, I'm guessing there's a stairwell on either end and probably the central one as well. Now I agree 100% with what you're saying as far as that you may find yourself in a situation where that central stairwell is contaminated because it's obviously much closer to the fire. But you may also have a little more of a challenge. Now what you could do is go up that stairwell on the one side or the other to the 5th floor, come across the floor to the center stairwell, and then maybe you can make your connection there, you know what I'm saying, and still be able to maintain, stay out of that IDLH before you make access into the involved stairwell. Probably going to be the contaminated stairwell. Does that answer your question, or does that kind of match what you're talking about?
It does. I like that best. Thank you.
No, just a thought. I think that's a great question, though. I mean, just and please understand that, you know, we're throwing things out at you here, and just, you know, we're giving you ideas, but this may be a situation where you have a pre-plan or you're familiar with the building, and you know that the only standpipe of the building with the standpipe is coming off the, you know, the east or west side. So there's a number of things that may come into play there, just like you said, that may make sense. It may make sense to go up, you know, that east or west stairwell, come across on the 4th floor, and then gain access into the contaminated stairwell, knowing that once again we can operate in a safe location. The other thing it does for you, and not always, but especially on residential, is the floor below a lot of times going to be exactly the same as the floor above, especially on residential. So you have the ability, if you do something like that, to see what the floor plan is going to look like. Because if you open the door on the 6th floor and you have zero visibility, you may be able to, you know, have a pretty good idea of the layout of the floor plan if you run the floor below. Not always the case with commercial, because they change the floor plans up quite a bit more on the commercial than they do residential. Residential typically has the same floor plan that doesn't change, but commercial can change based upon the different businesses and what their needs are. But great question. Yeah, so just utilize whatever stairwell is most appropriate for you to get closest to the fire and be able to deploy your hand lines and be effective. Good question. Anything else from anybody else? Okay, so we appreciate it. Thank you so much for participating here today and being online. Once again, if you have questions, don't hesitate to ask. You can see some of the resources that I would utilize to put this program together. There's a lot of stuff out there. I'm telling you, if you're not online and looking at some of the stuff on the websites that are out there right now, there's a tremendous amount of information, not only about mid-rise fires, but certainly residential, commercial, and everything else out there. So I would encourage you to get out there and see what other people are doing, and you can see both good and bad what people are doing and learn from those as well. So thank you for being here. I appreciate it. Have a safe day out there, and we will see you next month.
Mosey over to dispatch and ask them. Area. Sector 2 called emergency traffic. I think extreme high. Back to it. This transmission too. Oh, that's what I'm learning. I wrote that. Not that the high emotional response to it, like the mechanics of it. Just reread. saying emergency.
Probably something we ought to take a look into and want to say, talk about how they could connect. The meeting, well, please get out of here.
I'm gonna go to or chat with those folks, send you an email, maybe with some points. Should probably set off that.
Just even about, gotta make sure we give common notes. Well, thank you for being here.
Yeah, absolutely. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you so much.
Thanks
So
for
much
keeping
turnover.
turning this.
Yeah.
Nobody on the floor is ever traffic.
Well, and then we have people, some people use the priority traffic term that people go. We don't really have an official, does that mean it's kind of, it's like emergency traffic, but not quite emergency traffic, but I need the air.
It's like
Emergency traffic light or something, yeah, what's that, so you gotta,
It's like the margin.
yeah,
Sound really,
yeah.
it's something that you're not supposed to say, but you're just saying like,
Exactly.
this doesn't get better than like.
yeah,
a
so I
minute
mean,
where-
you have a guy that's going, hey, it's like when you find a victim, you go, well, because, you know, I hear crews that'll call emergency traffic and you find a victim, you go, it's not emergency traffic, I mean, it may be, even let command know that you got somebody you're bringing out, or, you know, to kind of get resources and that kind of stuff, but it's not emergency traffic. But I hear crews talking for that all the time, and I kind of go, it's important, but probably not emergency traffic. Once again, if you use it too much, yeah, exactly. If you use it too much of the time, now we get the, it becomes less effective. Same thing, you know, Mayday when you're,
Yeah.
You said it was a hydraulic
No,
deal that led
I was
window.
and
failure or
I've
something?
learned something and I knew. But really, this is just being self-critical. I shouldn't talk about. Right. You know what I mean? Now I taint, just talking to you guys, and I tainted the message. Because once I finally got through, finally talked to Matt. He said, so they did hydraulically ventilate seconds prior to telling. All Hickey wanted to make sure was find one of them to open. Well, that's what happened. So as soon as they're running hydraulic ventilation, when they tell command they want to do it, command don't fail the already shut down hydraulic ventilation. And so now out of frustration about it, Sean, it's Paul saying, sector boss gave a prime on a second floor, every fucking square inch of it, fire above us and there's no fire below us. There is a fire here somewhere. Because he finally grabs the other, that's drags him with him down the hallway. Finally, if this is the room of order, it's to a bathroom they knew existed. They don't searched it. They missed it.
Fires in that.
Now, homeowner says she opened, get the guy that lit the fire up and get him out. She left and left the door open. Here, company. Because they touched it and viewed to see it as. But when that call gets back to this bathroom, they start to feel significant. That sheetrock is. That's when the flash over the windows, flash they thought it was gonna be hydraulic driven. When I finally get a negative map. Time, it is, 5-minute mark, about 38 seconds after the 5-minute mark.
Trying to find it, hadn't found it yet.
And bad intel. So here's something we captains, we battalion chiefs. By golly, we're gonna